Very well. The next amendment listed in the running order is the 16th amendment lodged by the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph F, after the words set out in Appendix 2, Summary Tables 5.1 and 2 of the report, insert the words except that in Summary Table 5.1, 2022 Revenue Heads of Expenditure. The head of expenditure for children, young people, education and skills shall be increased by £2.05 million to fully fund the increased costs associated with the nursery education fund for 3 to 4-year-olds, following the hourly rate increase and the increase in provision from 20 to 30 hours.
Who's rapporteur for this?
So it will be Senator Valwa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Senator Valwa.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'd like to begin this amendment by thanking the Minister and the Council of Ministers for accepting 2 of our 4 amendments to the government plan. Sorry, 2 of our 6 amendments to the government plan. Earlier this year, the former Education Minister signed a letter of instruction to not only increase nursery education fund hours from 20 to 30 hours, but also an increase from £5.49 per hour to £6.70 per hour for these hours. The policy proposal identified funding estimates of 1.9 million in 2021 and 2.7 million in 2022. So the rationale for the panel bringing this amendment forward covers a number of points. There appears to be a discrepancy in numbers allocated in this government plan compared to the previous government plan. This was identified as a 1.43 million difference in allocation between both plans and therefore funding budgeted for in 2022 is insufficient to continue with the demand under this fund. To back up this point, the panel obtained evidence from the department that stated the following. The panel should note that the original business case for the Early Years Policy Development Board outcomes was developed before the report was completed. The business case identified estimated sums to first implement an increase from 20 hours to 30 hours for 3 to 4-year-olds at a maximum hourly rate of £5.77. Implement a targeted 30-hour offer for 2 to 3-year-olds at an estimated £6.50 per hour. The business case did not include any monies for other recommendations that were in the final report and is therefore, even at the full original value, not enough to fully fund all the recommendations. Based on current numbers, we estimate the maximum likely 2022 cost for 3 to 4-year-olds accessing 30 hours would be 3.32 million. We as a panel also note and thank the Minister for providing comments to this amendment as of Monday this week. Unfortunately, the comments do nothing to reassure the panel that the funding being proposed without this amendment are sufficient. There is a claim that this is not accurately costed. The figures were from the department following further questioning by the panel, who were attempting to determine the very variables and flexibility allowed within the overall envelope, taking into account different settings, the hourly rate and numbers of children. Further questioning since the comments were released has suggested that a further £86,000 within the demographics bid will assist in what is apparently predicted to be an £86,000 deficit in the fund for 2022. Should demand that has not been identified need further funding, this will be paid via funds that have been agreed for recruitment in other areas. So this is the basis for us bringing our amendment to the Nursery Education Fund today. There is concern that inadequate funds will require a squeeze and reduced priority in other areas of the department that we believe may be unacceptable and have a negative impact. However, there may be a request of the Assembly to withdraw if the Minister can confirm and provide clarity and transparency. Firstly, around the actual numbers based on the variables, the potential impact of his wider budget without these additional funds, assurance that sufficient funds are available for maintaining the Nursery Education Fund, and to make a commitment to provide a statement or a report to this Assembly on the position of the Nursery Education Fund prior to the end of the first quarter of 2022, with an action plan for furthering the early years report work. On the basis of the commitment to report, if the Minister wishes to do so, we will also withdraw the amendments on targeted funding for 2 to 3 year olds and the funding for degrees, numbered amendments of 17 and 20. So I therefore propose the amendment.
The amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Well, does anyone then wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Wickenden.
Thank you, sir. So I'll be voting against this amendment, despite fundamentally agreeing that funding for 3 to 4 year olds is important. But so this amendment is not accurately costed or considered, and I cannot support it. So my team of officers will do as they always do, and through informed analysis and demographic projections, including any potential impact of net inward migration, they will continue to identify and assess the level of funding required and plan accordingly. This will be in the form of well-informed bids to the next government plan that accurately reflect the financial package required to maintain our universal offer of 30 hours of nursery education for all children whose parents wish this. So this work will take account of the many variables that must be considered, including the number of children within the private and voluntary sector nurseries, the number of children in school nurseries, the hourly rate that is to be reviewed annually, considering the retail price index and the index of average earnings figure as per the Nursery Education Fund Partnership Agreement. I'm assured by my early years team that the level of funding in this government plan has the appropriate funding to fund the current need for delivering 30 hours of nursery education funding, and that the increased funding in this amendment is not required. I do agree that there is a slight shortfall of about £80,000, but we are confident that due to recruitment challenges and the likes, that this can be funded within budgets and no extra money will be required. So through the Best Start programme of work, we have a clear priority plan for our short, medium and long-term aims that support the intention of the Early Years Policy Development Board. Through consultation, engagement and collaboration, we will put forward timely and appropriate business cases for future funding needs. In addition, sir, I would like to again remind members of the appendices 3 and 4 to the draft government plan, whereby the previously agreed growth underpinning Children First of approximately 35 million per annum is demonstrated in greater detail. So the amendment as proposed increases consolidated fund expenditure by 2 million in 2022 and a total it increases expenditure by 8.2 million over a period of the plan. If accepted, this amendment will result in lower surpluses in 2023 to 25 years of the plan, preventing them to be available for and applied to reduce borrowing for COVID. So in respect of the 2022, subject to the outcomes of other amendments, this amendment will result in a possible negative balance of the consolidated fund, because the amendment does not propose a funding source for this expenditure. This would mean possibly that the government plan could not be approved by the Assembly under Article 14 of the Public Finances Law, and the debate would need to be suspended to enable an amendment to be prepared in order to balance the plan for 2022 before approval. So this amendment asks for the 2.5 million to be put forward for the 3 to 4 year olds, not for the delivery of all of the recommendations of the Early Years Policy Development Board, which, as I've said earlier, is being worked up by officers to properly understand with the industry the capacity and needs and requirements for some of the recommendations to be brought forward. So in that basis, I cannot support this. The department is assuring me that there is appropriate funds and that we can fund the 2022 requirement for the 30 hours. So I ask members to just not accept this amendment as it is not required. Thank you, sir.
Will you give way to a point of clarification, please, from Deputy Ward?
I think that's only fair, sir.
Yes, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I hope this is a really useful one, because I wonder whether the Minister missed the last bit of Senator Valwa's speech. I know what it's like online. I only just logged on myself because I had trouble, but there was a part of it that said if you would commit to providing a report on the statement on the position of the NEF and the action plan for early years prior to the end of Q1 2022, the actual numbers, potential impact and sufficiency of funds, etc., then we would be happy to withdraw this and the other two linked amendments, 16, 17 and 20. And I thought the Minister was going to speak to say yes or no to that. I wonder, sir, it may well simply have been that you did not hear that part of the speech because of the format we're in. Some clarification on that, so sorry.
Thank you. No, that's a perfectly valid point of clarification. Deputy Wickenden, are you able to clarify whether you are prepared to commit to a report, in which case various of the amendments will be withdrawn?
Sir, firstly, can I thank Deputy Ward for that clarification? It's very helpful. I think Deputy Ward, like myself, there's a lot of amendments that we've been preparing for in this debate. So actually, I'd happily, before the end of Q1, write the report as requested and get it to the scrutiny panel with all that in mind. Absolutely, sir. I think that would be very helpful.
Well, I think it might be helpful then if I simply ask Senator Valwa, is that assurance the assurance you were looking for?
Yes, we were looking more for a report to the Assembly, but to the panel is fine, as we will publish it anyway. Sir, on that matter then, if that commitment is satisfied by the panel, will I need to seek a request to withdraw?
You'll need to seek the leave of the Assembly to withdraw this amendment because it is open for debate. You do not need the leave of the Assembly to withdraw the other two amendments. So do you seek the leave of the Assembly to withdraw this amendment?
Yes, please, sir.
Very well. Does any member wish to speak against the withdrawal of this amendment at this point? If no member indicates a desire to speak against it, then I will treat it as a standing vote agreeing to the withdrawal of the amendment. Very well, that amendment is withdrawn with the leave of the Assembly. I understood that this applied also to the 17th and 20th amendment. Is that correct, Senator Valwa?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Very well, the 17th and 20th amendments are accordingly also withdrawn. Well, member will just give me a moment or two to catch up from my notes. Yes, the next amendment on the running order is the 18th amendment lodged by the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
Page 2, paragraph F, after the words set out in Appendix 2, summary tables 5.1 and 2 of the report, insert the words except that in summary table 5.1, 2022 revenue heads of expenditure, the head of expenditure for children, young people, education and skills should be increased by £10 million to allow for additional resources to implement the recommendations of the inclusion review and to cover any shortfall in funding identified within the new school funding formula for 2022.
Deputy Ward, are you acting as rapporteur for this amendment?
Yes, sir. This one's mine. Just get my camera on. Thank you, sir. So I may take a little bit longer than before on this one, so that we can explain in detail why this has come from the panel. So I just asked the Assembly to bear with me on that. However, we have tried to be as positive as possible with the other amendments to speed this process along. So this amendment proposes to increase by £10 million in 2022 the head of expenditure for children, for SIPES, Children, Young People, Education and Skills. This is in order to provide additional funding for the implementation of the recommendations arising from the Inclusion Review report and any shortfall identified from the new school funding formula. So there is a background and a rationale really for this and for the school funding formula part. So we've mentioned before, but during a public hearing with the Board of Governors of LA, we heard of a £23 million deficit. This was questioned by the Minister for Children and Education, who explained that a figure had been identified. However, this was due to go through what was called a quality assurance process in terms of the school funding formula. The panel did request a copy of the new school funding formula in order to identify whether the amount of funding attributed to education in 2022 was sufficient within the proposed government plan. I remind members that the funding formula is currently 30 years old. It was in 1992 and has not been revised since that time. And we can only assume that the funding for 2022 was based upon that formula. So despite repeated requests for the Minister to share the new formula with the panel, the Minister has taken the decision not to. This led to a statement by the panel in the Assembly and an urgent question to the Minister. The information has still not been provided by the panel to the panel. It is intended for the new funding formula to be in place on the 1st of January 2022. That is direct evidence from a public hearing. The view from the Minister himself. The view of the Minister is that the funding formula does not relate to the funding identified within the government plan, specifically the Education Reform Programme. The panel disagrees with this statement for a number of reasons. Like the 2022 budget is assigned using the average weighted pupil unit, the ARPU, which is based on the old formula, as I mentioned. The funding level is therefore based entirely on the old formula, which is due to be replaced in January 2022. Without sight of the new funding formula and its identified amount of funding, the panel cannot state with any degree of certainty, a point that we outlined in our report on the government plan, that the funding level for education is sufficient for 2022. So this is the, if you like, the meat and of scrutiny work, and we cannot, with any degree of certainty, give that assurance. Given the changes in education over the past 30 years, there is a high likelihood that there will be a shortfall in funding identified in a new formula. And without sight of that formula, the States Assembly, not just the scrutiny panel, but the States Assembly as a whole, is not in possession of all the facts in order to assess and agree the funding level of education in 2022 in the government plan. Therefore, the panel has agreed that additional funding for 2022 is required within the education budget in order to address the likely shortfall should it appear. And that's important, the likely shortfall should it appear. It should be noted that the panel has also been forced to make this amendment by the unwillingness of the Minister to share information that would allow the panel to objectively assess the funding allocation in 2022. So in terms of the inclusion review, it was conducted by NASON and reviewed Jersey's arrangements for special educational needs. We requested a copy of the inclusion review from the Minister for Children on the 13th of October. Despite repeated requests, the panel was not provided with a report. The Minister confirmed it was his intention to present the report to COM prior to sharing with the panel. This was ultimately shared with the panel on the 30th of November 2021. However, this was too late for the panel to review and establish whether a further amendment was required. But the panel now notes there are no funding levels identified in the report. The Minister has advised the panel that work is ongoing to create a costed action plan in respect of the report. Given that there is no funding attributed to the inclusion review recommendations within the government plan 2022 to 2025, and that work is ongoing to cost the implementation, the panel is seriously concerned that without funding in place, this work will not be progressed in 2022. Given the importance of this work, the panel has therefore agreed that 10 million additional funding should be used where required to implement the recommendations of the inclusion review as well. So there are many reasons why this be supported. there is a high probability that a new funding formula will identify a shortfall in education, and the evidence that we have gained from direct meetings with governors is important for us to consider. And that really important point that we are funding 2022 with a 30-year-old formula, but with a new formula in the background that we have not seen, which is extremely likely to ask for more money because of the changes in education over the last 30 years. I will say just a little bit more because I have gone on a little bit. So this amendment is in direct support of the common strategic policy of putting children first. We understand that it's difficult to fund, but we have funds that have been allocated to consolidated fund for our technology fund, for example, and other areas without a specific use of that money. And it is unlikely that some of that money, a lot of that money, will be used for some time. And so therefore there is money available, but there is an urgency to fund for 2022 because the school funding formula will be in place on the 1st of January. So unless we fund that effectively, we have wasted money on the school funding review. We have wasted money on the inclusion report, and we are not going to fund our schools appropriately. Therefore, sir, I make this amendment and I urge members to support this amendment so that we can move education forward and give the minister the funds that he will need in the future to actually take on the changes that I'm sure he wants to make. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Very well. Deputy Wickenden.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the panel has constantly asked me for things like the school funding formula, which I don't have, sir. I cannot give the panel something I don't have. They could ask me for Donald Trump's taxes. I can't give that either, sir. I don't have them. Sir, are we voting against this amendment as there's insufficient evidence that the amount specified is correct and that the panel have not clearly identified how it may be funded without increasing the total amount of government spending beyond the planned affordable levels? So this amendment proposes 10 million per annum to be applied to the implementation of the inclusion review, sorry, sir, and to cover any shortfall in funding identified within new school funding formula for 2022. So it's too early to be able to identify any additional funding which may be required to implement the inclusion review, or to be clear on any shortfalls identified through the work of the new school funding formula for 2022. So these initiatives are both project work streams under the Education Reform Programme. Work on new school funding formula is underway but not yet complete. The work stream on the inclusion review will commence following the publication of the report earlier this week. This will start with the consideration of 50 recommendations of the inclusion review and will include the development of a costed improvement plan to deliver the recommendations that are approved. So inclusion is an area that the Independent School Funding Review of 2020 flagged as needing separate expert advice. Additional budgets have already been approved to address the most urgent gaps in the service to be allocated via the Education Reform Programme. From this year to 2024, this government has already committed to investing 1.8 million extra to support students with the most significant special educational needs. 2.1 million for children with low prior attainment, 1.5 million for English as an additional language, 3.4 million extra for Jersey Premium, $500,000 to strengthen the Central Education Psychology resource, and 700,000 for mental health and well-being. So that's 10 million extra going in already identified and analysed, costed and implemented. We are acting, sir, and investing more in education than ever before. We are putting 2.68 million additional funding into inclusion issues through the Education Reform Programme compared with 2020. And the increase between this year and 2022 is already committed at 1.79 million. In addition, 5.5 million deficit funding from the Education Reform Programme has been allocated in 2021 to areas of pressure across education, including overspends in the central inclusion support and indirect school budgets. So members will have seen that the proposed additional allocation of 678,000 in 2022 to offset growth in pupil numbers, of which the special schools are the main beneficiary, and I can advise a further 2 million is proposed to fund growth in the number of children with identified records of need. This is proposed to be retained within the annually managed expenditure reserves to be called down when required. So the work on the funding formula is progressing, but it is not yet complete. There will be several iterations as policy decisions over the work stream of the Education Review Programme as they are worked through. If shortfalls are identified, these will be brought forward, supported by evidence and policy through the government plan process for future years, in the same way as investment has been progressed in previous years. So in the now published Inclusion Review, it sets out 50 recommendations broken down into 4 categories for their timelines of delivery. There are 8 quick results that are set out for 6 to 12 months. That's the end of the year. Then there are 21 short terms that will take 1 to 2 years, 15 medium term recommendations that will take 3 to 5 years, and 4 long term that will take 6 to 10 years. The 8 quick results for the delivery that will be in 2022 in the 6 to 12 months are as follows. Recommendation 1. Government and Jersey should clearly define inclusive education in a way that is accessible and understandable to all residents of Jersey. Recommendation 2. Government and Jersey and all stakeholders should decide to the kind of inclusive education to which Jersey aspires. A flexible interpretation based on the continuum suggested in this review can be used to progress towards an enhanced and sustainable approach to inclusive with an associated vision statement. Recommendation 3. A ministerial level appointment should be made to champion inclusive education in Jersey. It's published, so I will go through. These are not areas that need £10 million in funding. These are recommendations in the short term that are quick wins that can be delivered within the work within the department. The panel is asking you to allocate 10 million to deliver them, and which members see it's just not needed. In an earlier debate, I've already ascertained that we're putting an additional £11.2 million to directly into schools within 2022 and 11.6 in following years. So there's already a lot, millions more additional money going into schools within this government plan. So this amendment would increase the consolidated fund expenditure by 10 million in 2022. In total, it would increase expenditure by 40 million over the period of the plan. This will result in lower surpluses, preventing them being available to reduce the borrowing that we have for COVID. So I cannot accept this amendment. I've proven we're investing millions more in education through rigorous research and analysis of the priorities, something this amendment clearly lacks. I will continue to research and analyse any gaps in provision and develop costed plans to close any of them that are identified in the same way I've done through the Education Reform Programme. So there is no allocation of where this funding will come from. It's so I don't know where the money will not be spent, so it can sit not being used in the site's budget. I urge members to reject this amendment and let the experts within sites work with their stakeholders to develop a costed plan for improvement and bring these back to future government plans where a fully informed decision can be made. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? No member wishes to speak on the amendment. Senator Valois.
Yes, sir. And briefly, I find the argument the minister's just made, particularly right at the beginning, a rather spurious one. to say the least. I wouldn't expect him to have Donald Trump's taxes because he's accountant. So no, he shouldn't have them, but he is the minister and has a legal duty to provide education. And if he states that he's going to analyse and regularly analyse and make sure that, you know, these experts are providing a proper analysis and evidence-based information, why doesn't he have the funding formula? It was stated to the panel in a scrutiny hearing, the funding formula is due to come on board on the 1st of January 2022. He also made a point in his speech that there was an amount for low prior attainment. My understanding from the Independent School Funding Review in their appendix, when they referred to the proposed funding formula that may be adopted, low prior attainment was part of this. So, sir, the funding formula must be ready. You cannot tell me on the 16th of December, we are implementing a funding formula for our schools from the 1st of January in a couple of weeks' time without knowing what's in it. I'm sorry, it's just, it doesn't wash with me, and I don't think it should wash with anyone else in the States Assembly. And yeah, the minister can have a go and say that, you know, we don't have the numbers and we don't have the exact amounts, but we've kind of been stuck in a hole because we haven't been able to obtain that information and the ministers refused to provide it to us. So we've done the best that we can. We've done a full report identifying all the evidence that we obtained during this review. And also all the information around education inclusion review. We only received that not so long ago. And I think as for inclusion, we can see why the report recommends, especially from the speech, we can see why the report recommends a Minister for Inclusion. So the reason why the panel put this amount in, no, we didn't have the exact figures because we weren't given the funding formula. We put this in because this is an extremely important debate. When I start hearing members talking about skills deficits, when I hear members starting to talk about the need for supporting our young people to get them into whether it's apprenticeships or trades or whatever that may be, in order to do that, we need to invest in them. And to invest in them, that requires the funding. And all the numbers that the minister just read out, a large part of that is funding deficits that were in place and taking account of low prior attainment that was never taken account of. And that goes back to the point of the 30 years difference in funding formula. And so, sir, I would ask members to really think and take this seriously in terms of the work that the panel have done is evidence-based on the basis of the information we've received from the department. 10 million might not even be enough. And the reason why I say that is because we don't know what the funding formula is. But the inclusion, there are areas of inclusion that we know there have been huge demands in areas like Montalabe School for needs. And we know from the previous debate about resources and the issues that come about for resources in schools. We heard from the Board of Governors about the school unable to fix a wall, an unstable wall, because they don't have the sufficient funds. So I would ask members to please be considerate of what we've done in terms of the work on the panel, in terms of the work that was done on the Independent School Funding Review, and bear in mind that the outcomes, if we intervene and we invest at the right time now, what that will produce for our economy and our families and our future as an island. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. I'm actually listening, and I would be faintly amused, but this is actually an exceptionally serious subject, which is not really room for amusement. Deputy Wickenden said that there had been no consideration as to where this money's coming from. I think we've already seen today with several propositions that's not really a concern, where the money's coming from. What he's always put forward, which is as a new and novel way of doing it, is, oh, well, you found the money for this. Well, firstly, we found the money as an assembly for whatever has gone forward, whether that be for mental health or whatever else we have found money for in the last 3.5 years. The assembly have voted these things through as part of a government plan and in part of other propositions that have been bought. So it's not anything other than the assembly who have found that money to spend. But we often hear from Deputy Ward in his interesting speeches. Well, I find them interesting, sir. I don't wish to speak for the rest of the assembly, but I find that, and he has regular updates on his family life and what his children would think and what his wife would think. And to put this into sort of context of, well, if you've spent this, we should be able to spend this. I have no idea, sir, if Deputy Ward has a joint bank account. He may or may not, but let's say that he does. And let's say he agrees with his wife, as we agree in the assembly, on what we're going to spend, that they should get a family car. And he spends £10,000 on that family car. Would he expect one day to come back and see his wife wearing a brand new gold Rolex that she bought for £10,000, and when he said to her, well, how have we afforded that? Where's it come from? For her to say, well, you found the money to buy on a family car, and that's where I'm going to find the money. Oh, and by the way, Deputy Ward, although she probably doesn't refer to him as Deputy Ward, the bank manager would like you to ring him up to explain why we're now well overdrawn, because that is the position, sir, that these sort of propositions are going to put this government in. We have not got a spare £10 million just like that. So when people come to the assembly, it really is 100% important that people cost exactly where this money's coming from. And I'm just not hearing it today. I haven't heard it in the last 2 to 3 debates. It's a case of, oh, well, we'll find the money because we found it for this. It doesn't work like that. Real life doesn't work like that. We haven't got a massive credit card that we can just put this on and then pay it back at 24% later. And you wouldn't run your own domestic affairs like that. And I don't think we should be running the island of Jersey like that. Thank you, sir.
Much, Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. We are talking about £10 million of additional funding today, and I want to thank Deputy Ward for opening this debate, and Senator Valois for continuing it with passion, I think, and I hope that's something that comes across, is that the panel have really worked hard on this, and we have been disappointed that we haven't been able to get the answers that we wanted. But even though we didn't manage to do so, we haven't given up, because we do not give up on children. And we want to persist with this because the evidence is so clear to us. And I'm going to refer to the Independent School Funding Review. And I want us to go back to that because that is where the evidence is. We might not have the formula, because we cannot, clearly we have not been able to compel the Minister to share that information with us. But we have done our best. And as Senator Valois says, this amount possibly isn't going to even cover it. The new funding formula, which we haven't seen, which is supposed to be in place in January, sir, I mean, I think it's probably stating the obvious here that new funding formula is not going to result in the same amount of funding or less funding being applied to schools. That is an obvious point that I think perhaps we have to remind ourselves of. And the evidence for that is in the independent report, which found that there is and I'm quoting directly from the report here, there is a structural deficit in the funding of education in Jersey. And that has not been solved as yet by the current minister. And so we do have a lot of rhetoric around putting children first, but And I know that some members dislike that phrase, but I do ask members today to actually reflect on what is most important to them, on what fundamental values they have. And I think, so I would be hard pressed to find a States member who does not agree that alongside areas like health, education is one of the highest priority areas that we should be investing in as parliamentarians. And I'm afraid that this government plan does not do that. It does not align with what I believe to be our shared values and the values of our islanders. And I think, as an aside, this is perhaps why we should be having a separate children's minister to argue for children in this way. But I do find it so strange that an education minister is saying no to money that is clearly needed, as stated by the report that has found a structural deficit in our funding of education. That money is clearly needed to properly fund the basics of our education system in Jersey. I mean, the report, sir, outlines just how bad it is in Jersey by comparing us with similar OECD jurisdictions. Jersey is right near the bottom of the table in terms of education spending. We're spending less than Luxembourg, a lot less, in fact, not even half of what Luxembourg are spending on education. We're spending less than the UK. We're spending less than Finland. We're spending less than Ireland. We're spending less than Belgium. We're spending less than Australia. We're spending less than New Zealand. We're spending less than Canada per child on education. This is just not good enough, sir. It's not good enough for our children. And I think that deep down, I think ministers know this, because the sole argument being wheeled out today seems to be, where is the money coming from? But we do have the money, sir. We are a high-performing jurisdiction, as stated in the Independent School Funding Review, and that is why in that report we are compared with jurisdictions such as New Zealand, Canada, Finland, UK, Luxembourg. And we can do better. So this amendment might not be perfect, sir. And again, I will state I don't think it's going to be going far enough. But I think, given the fact that we have compromised in other areas, and the reason why we have chosen to proceed with this amendment is because we are fully we believe that it is the most important amendment that will have the most positive impact for our children. And personally, I think that a portion of this money, a significant portion of this money, again, in line with the recommendations from the Independent School Funding Review, should be focused on early years. The panel maintains this amendment. And actually, in terms of finding money, IT is an area where we have an extra 38 million, I think, for IT. How are computers more important than children? I will be supporting this amendment, sir, and I hope that members today will do as I have suggested and reflect on what their values are, because our money should be following our values.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Chief Minister.
Yes, sir, thank you. So I really want to reiterate or try and offset this perception that's being portrayed that we are not investing in education, sir. And I took the liberty of, I've sent an email to members a few minutes ago, sir, but it is actually the table that I referred to earlier, which is on page 5 of the comments to this amendment. And it really is worth making the point, and I know there's lots of numbers around here, and we'll get away from numbers in a minute. But in 2019, the growth for education, so this is not SIPES, this is not putting children first. Actually, apologies, sir, I slightly misspoke in the previous debate when I referenced SIPES. I should have said putting children first, but anyway. Particularly education, growth in the Education Directorate, as laid down on page 5 of the amendments, clearly demonstrates a significant growth in investment in education under this Council of Ministers. So in 2019, the amount that was being invested in terms of growth in education was just under £7 million, sir. This year, 2021, that figure is £18 million, and it will go up in 22 to just under £25 million, sir. Those are significant increases. You know, that's 3 or 4-fold where we were, or 3 or 4 times where we were back in 2019. So we have taken significant steps to address a whole range of issues and get the investment in the right, we believe, in the right place. And actually, we're in that lot to pay tribute to Senator Valbar, because she very much pushed for the educational reform programme monies that are in there. But sir, and the point about that is that the schools review, as I understand it, so was based on very much international comparators and was very much costed, sir, and very evidence-based, as you would expect. So the inclusion review actually is a different type of review. It's oddly enough, as I've always understood matters, it's not fundamentally about money. Yep, it might cost some more money, and Deputy over time, but Deputy Wickerton has addressed that. There are sums of money in the plan already, but the point is the fundamental bit is about mindset. It's about shifting culture of the organisation. It's about updating legislation and policies. It's about providing more data and things like that. It's about long-term strategies for mental health and well-being. Now, there is money in the budget for that, sir. More, widening education provision and things like that. Now, but the point being, sir, the initial point is that it's saying start with changing the mindset. Don't necessarily start with changing the money further. But I go back to that point. If you look at the growth in education in our very last few years, the figure for next year is going to be in relation to 24 million, as opposed to where it was in 2019, which was just under 7. That is a significant increase. Now, on top of that, and I know Deputy Dublé made some comment about investment in IT and cited a number. Very quick mathematical calculations there. If one looks at the capital programme, which is a lot, not only, but is a lot of where the IT, for example, spend is coming out, the education programme is vast. And for reference, if it helps, that's page 136 of the government plan. Because we've got a range of educational projects under major projects and also under school and educational development. A very quick calculation indicates that the total of the last 2, sir, relevant to education is £87 million. And actually, sir, I know I've missed bits in there that cover other educational areas. So capital investment in education over the next 4 years in the plan is £87 million. As we've said, the growth solely in the education department, not in putting children first category, is over the last few years, but starting from 2019 was about 7 million, and we are now projecting to go to just under 25 million. That is a significant increase, and some of those monies have directly been about rectifying issues to do with inclusion, and that is why, sir, at this stage, we are saying that the point of the inclusion, we were saying, change the mindset first, get the culture right. That doesn't require an extra 10 million next year. So we have a significant level of growth between this year and next year, all of which, within those numbers, will assist in inclusion already. And for all of those reasons, that is why we are not supporting this amendment. And you know, it is pretty rare, sir, for a minister to be saying, no, I don't need the money. I don't need £10 million extra. What we're saying, sir, is that there is money there. We are putting a lot of investment into education, and I hope those numbers indicate the level of that investment, sir. Thank you. And for that reason, sir, we are not supporting this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Chief Minister, does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Connie Tarbison, John.
Thank you, sir. Interesting to listen to the Chief Minister talking about education, and I applaud him and his colleagues for the additional investment, and I recognise the progress that has been made within education. It's a subject I follow closely. The mindset and culture was something the Chief Minister spoke about, and I'd ask him to look at the Council of Ministers' mindset and culture. Here we have a panel trying to do their very best for our children, bringing up well-researched documents, and they're being pushed aside, really. What we need, sir, is collaboration. We need solutions, sir. Senator Volwar reminded us the date, and I looked at how many working days there are. There are 8 working days towards the end of the year, and that includes Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. I'm not sure how much work will get done then. The Minister said that the money was just not needed. Well, in written question 493 of last week, we found out that 12% of the money from safeguarding had been transferred to support other services in SIPES. We heard from the Constable of St Ballard about issues with schools in his parish, and I'm sure the other constables can talk about their experiences. Earlier this year, when I arrived, we heard from the Education Minister who had transferred money from his budget in SIPES to the hospital project. And I questioned that. I questioned that because the school in my parish, sir, asked me to pay their legal fees because they couldn't afford to pay their legal fees. Yet the Minister had transferred money, capital money, to a hospital project. So we've got families and head teachers, sir, who are finding ways to jump the queue for children with needs. They're having to be inventive to find ways to get children up lists, which I accept are improving, but they're still not there. This is about additional support. In some schools, sir, my experience says there is a need for more learning support staff. We make a big thing about ELSA, but do we really invest in the people delivering that great service? Do we really give the children the time they need with those specialists? Deputy Ash gave us an analogy about Deputy Ward's personal finances. Well, if Deputy Ward has got a problem with his personal finances, I'd suggest to him that he speaks to the Treasury about borrowing, because they've become experts. Thank you, sir.
Well, Deputy Masson.
Thank you, sir. I'm just on a new device. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, sir. This amendment for me is personally very difficult. As members will know, I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic, and this amendment is something which, of course, raises a subject to me which I find very, very important. And when I was on, and it was Team Valois and Team Masson, yes, we as a team had to fight very hard in order to get the extra money for the education system. Senator Valois had to wait an extra year to have a very good evidence-based report in order to convince ministers around the Council of Ministers table to provide that funding. And so the Chief Minister is quite right to say that extra money has gone into the department. The counter argument will, of course, be, yes, but that was a department that was heavily underfunded for years and was running various deficits left, right and centre. So all that's really happened is we've caught up to where we should be, maybe a little bit more in certain areas. And as we went through the funding review, it became obvious that a section which there wasn't time in order to cover was the area about inclusion. And it's not just SEN, it's there are other areas in there, and the Constable St John's has just talked about ELSAs, which is your emotional literary support staff, because there are other needs there as well within the system. And Deputy Doublé asked us to consider our values, and supporting these types of children has been something in my career as a States member that I have done, whether that was back in the days when we did our review of suspensions and managed to get extra resource for children with autism in the system, whether that again was working with Louis, Deputy Dublé, on our SEN review into the system, which established the Parent Carers Forum to provide better communication between the department and parents of children with extra needs. So this is a subject which I really care strongly about, and it is a value of mine. But at the same time, a value of mine is also good financing, because I know who has to pay for all of this. And £10 million, that's just shy of an extra percent on GST. I mean, 1% GST raises about 15 million pounds. And the the Constable of St John's talked about a well-researched amendment from the panel. Well, can I just remind members, looking at the report from the panel, it's 1 page. It's not well researched, but I don't criticise the panel in that. In that the inclusion review came late in the day, and I mean, they're criticising the department for not providing the information they sought, but they can't provide information sought if they haven't even produced it themselves yet. So it's a horrible catch-22 situation, in that I agree with the panel. This is probably an area which requires a lot more resource than is currently being allocated, but neither the panel nor the minister can identify how much is actually needed. So, you know, we're not in a good place either way. And this is something which I hope members can feel from my voice is really tugging at my heartstrings, because this is something I desperately want to support, but also the panel has brought forward an amendment, but they haven't identified where the funding is coming from. And I'm surprised that a former chair of the Public Accounts Committee in Senator Valois is trying to do this. And I know her heart will be tugging as well on this matter. So this is my problem. This is my problem. I desperately want to support this because I agree that there is more that needs to be done in this area. But the reality is the money needs to come from somewhere. And there is no two ways about that. And I've got to be convinced on that point. So at the moment, I'm listening to other members, but practically, how can we sign up to something, £10 million, when we don't know where it's coming from? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Sontamore.
Thank you, sir. There have been some excellent speeches, and I don't intend to repeat any of the comments that have been made so powerfully already. But I think we need to look at this from the perspective of the role of scrutiny, the job of holding the government to account. This is a scrutiny panel who have consistently focused on this area of work, and they are raising an alarm bell, sir. The absolute practicality of the lack of clarity over the funding formula days before it becomes the funding formula for the year at play is just inexplicable. Deputy Masson, as an assistant minister, is concerned that there isn't enough money, but because we can't identify exactly how much money is needed, then, well, we can't agree to this money either. He seems to be talking in riddles, sir. I believe, to answer his other question of where is the funding going to come from? Well, Deputy Dublé pointed to a capital project, and I think we could all point ministers to a number of projects that probably are in the capital area that would be a lesser priority to most members of this assembly than the education of our children, and particularly the education of our children who have special educational needs, who really need the added investment that can be brought from them to get the very best out of their education, because those are the children who often have hidden talents that are harder to draw out, but can contribute greatly if discovered and helped to flourish in our community. Sir, this goes back to scrutiny and listening. Perhaps this has been one of the cultural problems that we have had throughout the life of this assembly, that some sort of wedge has sadly been drawn by the government against the views of scrutiny. There's an inability to listen, and perhaps to the Chief Minister, that is the cultural change that is needed. But I really struggle to understand how he can think that cultural change will provide services and support to children with special educational needs, rather than funding and people who have the ability, the experience and the knowledge to actually deliver those services. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Senator. Deputy Chadier.
Thank you, sir. Sir, what we have in front of us is the ability and the ability to make a decision today, which asks to put an additional £10 million into education, including for the purposes of inclusion. And we've heard the main arguments from the government opposing this is that we're already investing in it, and we're already giving it extra money, and where is the money going to come from? I think that's a fair assessment of the two arguments we've heard today, the main arguments, if not exhaustive ones. And I look at it this way. We've got a scrutiny panel which comprises a former education minister who is widely respected. I'm talking about Senator Valois, of course, by the Assembly. She was originally appointed by this Assembly, and she, I think, was widely respected by the public also to do that job. We've got a former teacher himself, who I know has been in Deputy Ward, who's been fighting and knows a lot about education and been fighting for better educational outcomes. And we've also got other members of the panel who bring their own particular and valuable expertise to that. I also listened very carefully to the former Minister, Deputy Masson, who I thought was effectively saying, you know, I find this difficult because I want to support it, but I can't because I'm a minister. That's how I interpreted what he was saying. Like a lot of things now, Deputy Masson needs to toe the party line of the invisible party, which is a shame because I know we stood together in 2008 and he was one of the great scrutineers, independently minded back then, who would hold all the governments to account over several terms. And I hope that he'll be looking at this today and actually listening to his the words of his former minister that he worked with and actually supporting the scrutiny panel on this one, because I think it's the kind of amendment that we can't afford to get wrong. And putting it simplistically, I suppose, hopefully not overly simplifying, is that what's the worst outcome here if we vote in favour? It means that our education system gets an extra £10 million. It means that we will be investing in young people even more, and we certainly know that that money will be well spent. But if we don't, and we go along with the government who have told us that there is a new formula coming along, but that the minister doesn't even know what that new formula is, it sounds like he's more likely to know more or want to know more about Donald Trump's tax affairs than he might about this particular formula that's coming forward, which is a bit strange. That's already been dealt with, of course, as a strange argument. And I think we know that money would be well spent. I think we all know teachers, we all know parents, we all know students who are struggling. And it's true that we do live in quite a divided island, but these are issues that can affect everybody. And just because there might be some wealthy grandparents, etc., they are very much aware of the struggles in, I think, probably all of our schools, but in particular some of those schools. And if I were a voter or a parent in St Clement or that area where La Rocquiere is based, La Rocquiere being the biggest school in the Channel Islands, with many of the challenges that go with that kind of big school, secondary school, and also the wider community issues, which are complex and have been especially more complex during the pandemic. which have shown us the real divisions that exist, socio-economic decisions, that still relate to social and economic outcomes. Unfortunately, I would be looking at where the support comes from my politicians for that school. So the likes of the Treasury Minister, Deputy Pinnell, Deputy Ash, Assistant Minister at the Treasury, the new Constable of the parish. Does he support that school? Does he know about the issues? I know he has supported that school in the past, no doubt. Does he know about the day-to-day issues of funding and of stress and of strain that goes in that particular school, just to name one? Does Senator Gorst, who was a former governor of that school and who may well still be a governor of that school, I don't know, does he know firsthand the difficulties that are going on when it comes to funding in that school? And I think we can all ask the same questions of ourselves about the schools in our catchments, because unless you speak to teachers or parents who are teachers in particular who are at the chalk face about these very complex issues, it's likely that we might not fully appreciate the complexities of it. And again, I refer to a friend of mine who has been coming to and from Jersey over years, and sometimes the predictability of outcomes is shocking, because we like to think that and believe in social mobility, but we look back at certain names from school, primary school or secondary school more often in the 1990s and say, did you hear about so and so? Oh yeah, he committed suicide. Did you hear about this other one, maybe from the same family? Yeah, he went to jail and he died in jail. Only found that out a few weeks ago. That's strange. Yeah, he went cold turkey, and when he got to jail, he unexpectedly died. Another one who, maybe has whatever kind of negative outcomes later on in life, all of which I suspect the teachers at the time could have predicted, which is sad because they don't like to look at a child and say, oh, that one, this is going to happen to that one. And all of these things are entirely avoidable with the right kind of intervention, with the right kind of resources, with the right kind of mentoring at the right time. And it seems to me that even nowadays in a very wealthy island, the problems are still the same as they've always been. And it's okay if you go to a particular type of school, you might be somewhat isolated or insulated from that. It's not guaranteed, of course. But I would say, what is the downside to allocating this additional money, which we know that every penny of it will be spent and spent correctly and valuably in our schools and our system, hopefully through early intervention. But the risk of actually not doing enough is much more serious. And I'd say to the government, of course you're spending money on this. Of course you're putting additional money in. That's because you have to. That's because the education system has been under-resourced for years, for over a decade, like we've seen in other areas. We had it in the arts and culture sector, and the additional money was not to actually give them a bonus, it's to get them back to the point at which they should have been in the first place. So this additional money is actually saying, where do we want to get to in future? What are the kind of social outcomes that we expect and want to deliver in what we say is an island that punches above its weight? But when you look at the list that Deputy Doublé kindly read out about other places where they invest a serious amount more, including other tax havens, and we look at that and think, well, shouldn't we be doing that? Is Jersey only going to be a place where we constantly are celebrating the fact that we're moving over seriously super wealthy people to pay little or no tax, who will probably be using private schools over here, or more likely not even any schools at all for their children? They may well be educated elsewhere. But what about the people who want to use our state school system or the other schools that we also invest in? Shouldn't they have the right to know that wherever you're placed in the island, that you'll get not just a reasonable or good education, that you'll get an excellent education, and you'll get great outcomes from teachers who are seriously motivated and will do proud this island in the future, and who won't be tired and worried about going to work, sir. I'll leave the comments there because I see Deputy Martin's put her light on and I don't need to say any more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Corritaba St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I could hear the emotion in Deputy Macron's voice, and I would urge Deputy Macron to vote for this, to think how he would have felt, where he would be now if his family had not fought for support for his dyslexia and dyspraxia. Please do not overlook these young people. They have so much intelligence, talents, gifts and skills, which without the funding and support will go to waste. What price do we put on children? What price? In the scheme of things, the government can find this money. There is an old French and Saunders sketch, and one of them says, in the old days, we didn't have educational needs, and the other one says, no. In answer, the other one says, no, we were told to sit in the back of the class and knit. Is this what we really want for our young people? We're in 2021. Please find this money. Please help to bring out the best in all of our children and our students. 10 million is a small price to pay for inclusion and bringing out the best. We are not all able-bodied. We are not all neurotypical, but we all have something to give. We all have skills which should be nurtured and respected, and we need the resources to do this. So I'd urge everyone to vote for this. Thank you.
Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. Who knew? If only I knew before, I need to put my light on and Deputy Taddeo would stop talking. Or is just so can't wait for hear what I've got to say. Amazement, sir. I wasn't really intended to speak, but I just think this has gone all over the place. Now, we have an amendment here for, this is my simple understanding of, for £10 million for the inclusion review, which was presented to COM probably a few weeks back and then to scrutiny. The minister says it's absolutely not needed. And before anyone runs away with the idea that Deputy Wickenden sits at the COM table going, oh, okay, he actually bangs louder than Senator Walra ever did. He would be screaming from the rooftops if he thought he could spend this money next year. It can't be spent. He's said it and nobody believes him. We're now, I mean, I've just heard from two people, we must find the money. There's capital projects we could stop doing. So we could, if you pass this, we'll stop doing a capital project or something. We'll have to find it. But that won't get done, but this money won't be spent. It's as simple as that. And Deputy Dublet talked to loads of other things what it could be spent on, but that's not what the amendment's for either. It's, I don't know if there was some frustration around scrutiny and like, will this be enough? Is it too much? Is it? But it's definitely too soon. We do not need that money. If we needed that money, or the education minister needed that money, and it could be pumping it in next year and having the outcomes by next December, he would have, we wouldn't have needed the amendment, sir. It would have been in our budget. We would have had to find it somewhere because he would not have let it go. So please don't think we're doing children down and we're not giving children what they need. The budgets are going up. We need to make sure we do the inclusion right. We heard the man, it's very, very good. I even said basically, and it was agreed by COM, will you come back in a year or two? Don't leave it too long because we want you to mark our homework. We want you to see if we ever got it and what we're doing. And he said, that's a really good idea. And so did the rest of COM. Please don't pull at heartstrings. And to accuse Deputy Masson to be a lapdog now, he's back in as an assistant minister, is really below the belt, sir. Deputy Masson, if he thought this could help, or he actually thought it was needed, he would vote with his conscience. Not needed. Please don't vote for it. Or, as I say, it will sit somewhere and we'll stop doing something else. We don't know what yet, but we'll have to stop doing it because that's how you have to balance the books, and nothing will get done in 2022. Thank you, sir.
Senator Mezek. Oh, point. You've asked for a point of clarification. Will you give way for a point of clarification, Deputy Martin, from Deputy Morell?
If I can help, sir, yes.
Yes, it was, sorry, thank you. It was just to ask, with reference to the speaker who said that Deputy Masson was a lapdog, would the Minister advise us which speaker that was? Because I didn't hear that mentioned anyway. Thank you, sir.
Sorry if I paraphrased it wrong. It was the speaker two before me. It was Deputy Tadier. Thank you, sir. If I missaid the words, no, I think he did say. I've very normally got a good memory, but if he said, yeah.
So a point of order. I don't know if it is a point of order, but I didn't say that. If it's helpful to the.
Okay, then, sir. If
well,
you did, I can apologise. I take that remark back. Yep, I thought it was implied,
well,
sir.
I think what technically happened is that Deputy Morell asked for a point of clarification of the of your speech, Deputy Martin. Then Deputy Tadier asked if you give way for a point of clarification on his speech, which you clearly did by implication, and therefore standing orders have been observed.
Thank you.
Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. And I shall be quite brief on this because it seems to me my analysis of this situation is that there has been an inclusion review and there is a school funding formula on its way. Two very noble things that I'm sure most people would support the intentions behind. Right now, it's unclear how much that will cost, and so the scrutiny panel has said it's unclear how much that will cost. So here's some help towards that for when you are ready to implement it, so you can hit the ground running. And what's the negative consequence of saying no to that help? If it turns out that they're proposing the wrong amount, too much, then SIPES can give it back. And if they're proposing not enough, then at least they'll have had a head start for when they eventually come back to the Assembly and ask for the right amount. So this is clearly the scrutiny panel trying to be helpful and enable the work that the Minister for Children and Education will want to do following that inclusion review and when the school funding formula is available. So it does strike me as bizarre to not want to accept that help. Comment has been made, and I think Deputy Wickenden made it in his speech, and he has done so for other amendments as well, asking where the budget will come from. Well, I'll just make this point, and I'll make this briefly before finishing, but I presume that budget will come from somewhere which is less important than putting children first, because that is the commitment we signed up to, and the implication of that is that other things are secondary to that. And so to find some funding to enable the recommendations from the inclusion review to be carried out and to make sure that our schools are funded properly, I would struggle to think of two better ways of putting children first. The scrutiny panel is clearly trying to be helpful here, so let's accept the help that they're offering.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Deputy Sutton.
Thank you, sir. And I rise to my feet reluctantly, try and settle some basic questions. And the first question is, I suppose, that do we know how much is designed is already allocated to be spent next year? The answer from several ministers or assistant ministers appears to be, well, actually, no, we don't. We don't know how much we want to spend, but whatever we do, we don't want to spend this 10 million pounds. No, not 100, 10 million pounds. And yet, this panel has identified a report that says you're falling behind the mark on these particular issues, and you should be allocating more. Of course, it's presented in very simplistic terms like that. And we also heard from Deputy Ash who used, actually it's Margaret Thatcher's favourite ploy of conflating what governments do with their money with what housewives indeed, do with their money. And the answer is we cannot be compared to the housewife who runs out of money when she runs out of money and has to stop spending. Why? Because we can borrow. And why would we borrow? Or we can redirect monies, we can reprioritize. Although the housewife could do that as well, I suppose, but only to a limited extent. And we can borrow. Why is it important that we treat our money differently to the housewife, the household? Because we actually have many longer term goals. And they are longer term goals to save money in the long term by spending in the short term. Fundamental to economic reasoning. And here we have an issue, particularly around inclusion, where if we get the answers wrong there, and particularly around early years, and if we get those wrong, then what we're doing is merely storing up problem after problem after problem after problem for the future. And we'll have to deal, usually very expensively, with those problems. Whereas if we get things right now, with the right spending, then that early intervention can save an enormous amount later on. We've all heard, heard comparisons that suggest that for every £1 you spend on early years, you get £7 return for the longer term. And that's what we're doing here. And it's about priority. And if the government, if the ministers, as they come towards the end of devising their budgets, realise that they have missed an area or have treated less well an area of spending, they will look at it and they will find that money. They will find priorities in order to deliver what they see as the right thing. And that's exactly what this scrutiny panel is suggesting. Reprioritise, look to deliver what you can, and in the long term, you'll be making savings. And that's the right way to approach the economy. It is not to stop spending as soon as you run out of money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Gila.
Thank you, sir. I thought we'd gone past that sort of economics where you could spend a lot of money now and things would improve in the future. That's true when you buy assets, but it's not true for anything else. And certainly, Jersey's government, Jersey's assembly, has not directed its government to borrow for common spending, for day-to-day spending. We've never had this authorization, and really, we are not trying to do that. Now, it's been very difficult for me to listen to the last three debates about why don't we have 8 million on this and why don't we spend 10 million on that? And it's fine. The government always finds the money. Yes, but where does it find it? It finds it by squeezing it out of other projects, out of other departments. We're talking about £10 million here because that will make life in Jersey so much better. Do you know what 10 million would do to the ambulance service, to the fire service, to the police service, to the prison? We take £100,000 from them, and that's desperate. That's cutting, very, very close to the bone. That's making our services less efficient. That's killing our services. But no, 10 million is so easy. We always have it. It's so easy to find. You can find it. There's always some way we can find it. all the services in the island have been asked to find 3% of savings for this year so that we could have a balanced budget, because this assembly has not authorized us to borrow money for spending, for day-to-day spending, which is the right thing to do. Every other government in the world runs at a deficit. We don't. We really don't want to. These 2 years are exceptional, and it's only because of COVID. Jersey doesn't want to run at a deficit. We don't want to borrow for day-to-day spending. Government will find money. 10 million pounds, it's so easy. Sorry, 10 million pounds could overflow all of my services with unbelievably needed money. But no, we're keeping it as close as we can, because we do not want to borrow for day-to-day spending, because we want to keep a balanced budget, and we will be serious about it. We will keep a balanced budget. So I'm sorry, this notion that it's so easy to find millions, if you think they might possibly be needed in the future, it's crazy. It's complete nonsense, and I'm sorry, but I didn't intend to speak on this particular subject, but that's too much. That's too much, this notion that you can just pull money out of a bag and it just happens. Yes, other governments do it. France, 8% of deficit this year. The budget deficit in France is 8% this year. They've got 1.5 times their GDP in borrowing, which we don't. We actually have a whole year of GDP, of savings, of cash, and we want to keep it that way. We think it's very, very important, because we're a fragile jurisdiction and we need savings. We need to make sure that there's enough money to go by if something really serious happens. So balancing the account is primordial to Jersey, and spending money where it's not absolutely needed is primordial to Jersey. Please do not vote for this. Thank you very much, sir.
Much, Deputy St Martin.
Thank you, sir. And we have the Home Affairs Minister telling us that this government is fiscally responsible. We've just had the Social Security Minister telling us that the Minister doesn't need this extra money that we're debating in this amendment. But previously, sir, a speech that stood out for me was Senator Valois, a formidable scrutineer par excellence, if I might say so. And I'm so pleased I never found myself being scrutinised by her. Because when she points out, sir, that the Minister has a new funding formula starting in January, but he can't tell us what it is, I start to worry. And unless the government are going to come up with some answers to that question, I will not be voting for them. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Senator Farnham. Senator Farnham.
Muted. I do apologise. Not often that happens. Yes, sir. I just want to reiterate a couple of important points, I think. But before I do that, following on from the speeches of Deputy Guida and Deputy of St Martin about fiscal responsibility, and we are, of course, being challenged quite rightly. We're being challenged on areas of fiscal responsibility, as one would expect, yet a lot of the amendments that are being supported by the people challenging us for on fiscal responsibility are seeking to significantly increase our expenditure, which is a challenging concept to deal with. In relation to this particular proposition, we are already investing in inclusion in schools, and as the Chief Minister and other members has referred to earlier, we've seen significant increases in the educational budget. 11.2 million of the education reform programme in 2022, sir, is allocated. Of this, 2.7 million is specifically for new inclusion activities. In addition, a significant proportion of the 5.5 million deficit funding has been allocated to pressures in schools arising, sir, from special educational needs. We have gone through the correct process to commission a review, which has been delivered to us just this month. We now have the findings. We need to reflect on these, cost these, make plans, and then, if necessary, come back for some additional funding. However, as I said before, the Chief Minister and others state this is about attitudes, it's about best practice, it's about reorganisation. This is not about just about additional funding at this point. It might be in the future, sir, and I think all members would support additional funding for education if it's absolutely needed. I think it will be. It's not at this point, sir. Let us do the work properly and deliver the correct amount that the system will need, sir, and act as the whole Assembly wants us to do, as being physically responsible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Deputy Pinnock.
Thank you, sir. It's just once again to reiterate the lack of funding source for this amendment. It could, as it stands, result in a negative balance on the consolidated fund, which is not permitted under the public finance law. So there's no identification whatsoever of where this money would come from, and it would not change the government plan. So I think people have to be very aware of that when they're voting for this. It has a significant impact. So thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Ward to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I thank everyone for their input this afternoon. So I'm going to start off by just addressing some of the later speakers, the last three actually. I believe what the government's got itself into is what one might refer to as a one-track pony argument. Where's the money coming from? We can't find the money. But unfortunately, it has contradicted itself during this government plan. And I say to Deputy Guida, this reference to the ambulance service and so on is just wrong. Let me put it to him this way. The £38 million for IT and the £20 million for the tech fund, are you taking that from the ambulance service? That argument falls down when you want that. So I think we can disregard that argument. And the same for Senator Farnham. You're missing the scrutiny argument, Senator Farnham, and I want you to please listen carefully as I go through it and explain it again, because we're talking about a specific need that we believe will happen. And in the end, that's what this vote will come down to. Do you believe that a new funding formula and a SCN report that has been published and shown 50 recommendations or more, as outlined by the Children and Education Minister, will need funding? That a new funding formula that renews a 30-year-old formula that was funding education 30 years ago with the very different needs then will need more funding. If you do believe that, then we will need to allocate money now, otherwise we will fail our children throughout 2022. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about that specific thing. Deputy Wickenden, right at the beginning, the Children and Education Minister stated that where we will get the money for future government plans. It suggests to me that there is no plan to fund properly in 2022. And so we have ourselves an emergency situation where we need to allocate in this sitting to the government plan the money that will be very necessary to go through to actually fund a formula. And so I would explain this, but I have no explanation for it. We were told that a funding formula will be in place on the 1st of January, but we are told today that the Minister does not have the funding formula. And as the Constable of St John so rightly picked out, and another cracking speech from him, it's the 16th of December. Schools break up on Friday. I don't know if the Minister's saying to the heads of schools who have worked incredibly hard this year, incredibly hard to keep their staff above water, to keep themselves above water with everything that's gone on. Oh, by the way, we'll give you the funding formula over Christmas, so in you come again, you don't get a holiday. And by the way, it's likely to be underfunded because we refused £10 million from the States Assembly last week because we told them we didn't need it. So I despair at that attitude. So let's talk about the figures. The £11.2 million that has been spoken about so often about this year. So look back at the public hearing. In the public hearing, we questioned that. And the answer we got was from the person in charge of the school funding review, the officer who was online at the time, because I think he had COVID, said actually the real figure of money that's extras for schools this year is 1.2 million, split between all of the schools. And as I said at that time, it's peanuts. So this, and again, from the Chief Minister, what we've had is this notion of growth. So growth which pays back deficit is not growth. It is getting us back to square one. It's like saying to somebody, you've grown because you've stood up. You're the same height. You just, it does not make sense. And I really want the Assembly to think about that. Really think about that word growth. It isn't growth. There is a possibility of growth if we have this £10 million allocated so that there's a possibility of genuine funding for our schools that is so desperately needed. Senator Valois, absolutely spot on, fantastic. And Deputy Doublé, I want to say publicly how proud I am of the work of our panel. How much work we've put in, the time we've spent, the support from the officers has been astoundingly good. And the report on the government plan, and I say to Deputy Masson, this was a short report for this because it refers to the government plan report, which covers so much in terms of the inadequacy of funding in the government plan. I'm very proud to be associated with those two members of the Assembly in scrutiny. So thank you very much for your work. Deputy Ash, I strongly suggest that you don't have a conversation with my wife. I really don't want to bail her out, and so I don't want to in front of you for what she might say or do. My wife is a strong, independent, intelligent woman who doesn't need me. She can look after herself. She can fund herself, and I would never tell her what to spend her money on. That's not the relationship we have. And I remind the Deputy that it's 2021. Senator Lafondra, Senator Lafondra sent everybody an email, and I was really concerned about that email because it had a huge table about what's being spent. But one fundamental flaw, Senator, and I'm sorry, Chief Minister, and I'm really concerned that this might be the problem. And I really ask you to open your eyes a little here and understand what the scrutiny panels, and please don't be antagonistic towards it, the ideas that we're talking to you about. You sent that email. That is based on the formula is 30 years old. So there may be figures in it, but the whole crux of the argument from the scrutiny panel is a new funding formula will be needed that proves that the old one is inadequate. So we are compounding the inadequate funding of education by considering that as growth. I believe so, and I'll be completely as kind as I can be here. I think simply you've got it wrong. And it's OK to get things wrong as long as you correct them. And this is an opportunity to correct them. So please take that opportunity. Deputy Masson, I wrote down here, like it was a joke, and I wrote down you're more torn than Natalie Imbruglia. There's a reference for you. And I understand what you were saying. And I would say to you that I go back to this notion that money can be found when it wants to be. And if we're really going to fund, then what we need to do is put the money aside now. Otherwise, this will not happen. And as an ex-minister, he knows the difficulty in getting funding. And I'm pretty sure that if we had offered this £10 million to him as minister or to Senator Valois as minister, they would have bitten their hands off to get that money. So I would suggest listen to the deputy, to the Constable of St Martin and take her advice. Senator Moore, you used a great word, which was inexplicable. What a lovely word. Inexplicable as to why this money would not be wanted by the Education Department. Inexplicable how we can be talking about such huge spend on other areas, which are priorities that are not putting children first, but not put this money aside should it be needed. And if the school funding formula comes out and the education review and comes back and said, you know what, we've got enough money and everything's hunky-dory, brilliant, absolutely superb, take the money back. But there is no evidence that is going to be the case. But the evidence we have managed to glean, and it's not been easy, is that we need more funding for education. So just couple of notes. The Constable of St Martin, what I wrote down here is thank you, and you get it. The Constable of St Martin, Constable Shentonstone, she gets it. She gets the education issue. And it's just such a reassurance for members like myself who have spent my life in education and others that members get it because they see children, they see perhaps themselves or their own children, and they understand that the support they need and are willing to vote for that. So thank you very much. Deputy Martin, it is impossible for you to say you do not need this money when you have not seen the school funding formula and we have not seen the funding formula.
Deputy, I'm going to interrupt you, and I hesitate to do so, but you have not spoken through the chair quite prodigiously during the course of your speech. And it's really important you do not refer to any members as you or address them directly. Although I'm sure it wouldn't go wrong in this speech, there is a lot of opportunities for it to go wrong if it's not a habit within the Assembly. And therefore, would you please address remarks through the chair?
So I do apologise. I think it's it's why I come into the Assembly every single day, because it's a much more contextual point. But I do apologise, and I will not do that again. So I would like to say to the deputies or anyone really in there who is saying that we don't need the money, that we simply do not know that. We don't know what the funding formula is, but the evidence is strong that there will be more money needed from the school funding review. And that is a separate document that we have seen from the formula itself. That's a really key point that perhaps I should have made earlier. And also the inclusion project did not, sir, have any funding attached to it, but it will need funding. So, sir, that's the reason I addressed that issue. And sir, I would say, sir, that Deputy Southern was correct. And so I would say this is about being proactive. And this is why I say to the government, it's okay to make mistakes in things, but you have to be proactive to solve them. None of us are perfect, not even myself, sir. But none of us are perfect and we make mistakes. And this is a mistake in the government plan. This is an opportunity to say, do you know what? We have to address this issue as we move for the future. So I think, and Deputy Luce, sir, I would like to say, sir, that I agree, and it's great to have other members with so much experience on the panel. So I'm going to finish because I've gone on long enough, but I want to summarise. So due to the lack of information provided to the panel in respect to the new funding formula, and given the existing one is 30 years old, there is no way to state whether the funding level attributed to education in 2022 is sufficient or not. The panel has heard evidence to suggest that the figure in relation to a shortfall under the new funding formula has been identified and is being quality assured. This should not be discounted, this evidence. There is high probability that a new funding formula will identify a shortfall in education funding, given the advances in education over the last 30 years and the increased needs of children and young people. The recommendations arising from the inclusion review are due to be costed by SIPES. There is no direct funding within the government plan in order to address this costing. Without identified funding, there is a risk that no progress will be made in implementing recommendations in 2022. And this, we believe, should be a matter of priority for the Minister. So the increase of £10 million, if accepted, will increase the level of funding in 2022 to ensure the shortfalls identified by a new funding formula can be addressed expediently and any recommendations from the inclusion review implemented in 2022. Any funding required above this amount will need to be identified and addressed by the Minister directly. Should the shortfall become in below the 10 million funding, then this allows the funding to be utilised in other areas of SIPES or returned. So this proposed amendment directly supports the common strategic policy of putting children first. Sir, in a child's life, we cannot lose a year because of stubbornness or because the inability to accept that an idea has come from a scrutiny panel that may be acceptable. So this is not a party political thing. This is a scrutiny panel thing. There's not political gain to be got from it. What there is to be got from this is as a assembly, we support our children. We do not have the time to waste time, sir, in children's lives. We must act upon funding now. We must act upon needs now. If we are truly to put children first, and we are going to give our children and our island the best start and the best future for us all. So I strongly urge members to support this amendment, and I ask for the appel. Thank you, sir.
Well, the appel is called for, and I ask for the greffier to post a link into the chat. I open the voting and ask members to vote.
Sir, can we have a bit more time, please? I'm having to sign in again.
Yes, certainly, Deputy. I mean, perhaps you'd just let us know when you have signed in. Otherwise, if you're having difficulty, you can vote through the. I'll take a vote delivered orally.
Thank you, sir. I've successfully voted. Thank you.
So you've been able to record your vote, Deputy, yes?
Yes, thank you.
Well, in addition to the chat, we have 38 members who have voted during the link, and I'm about to close the voting. So can I ask if members have had the opportunity of casting their votes? Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. In the link, there are 20 votes pour, 18 votes contre, and 1 abstention. There's a further 1 vote pour in the chat, making that 21. And there's a further 3 votes contre in the link, making it 21. And therefore, the amendment is defeated.
Sir, can we have the abstention and, well, in fact, can we have them all, please, sir?
Those members who voted for, Deputy Doublé, Constable of St John, Deputy Tadier, Constable of St Martin, Senator Valois, Deputy Lahegre, Senator Pallett, Senator Mezek, Senator Moore, Deputy Alves, Deputy Southern, Deputy Higgins, Constable of St Mary, Constable of St Brelard, Deputy Gardner, Deputy Ward, Constable of St Clement, Deputy of St Mary, Deputy Masson, and Deputy Pamplin. And in the chat, Deputy of St Martin. Votes in contra were Deputy Wickenden, Deputy Labbe, Constable of St Helier, Deputy of St Peter, Constable of Grouville, the Constable of St Juan, Senator Farnham, Deputy Martin, Deputy of St Juan, Senator Gorst, Deputy of Grouville, Deputy Truscott, the Deputy of Trinity, Deputy Aye, Deputy Guida, Deputy Ash, Constable of Trinity, and Deputy Lewis, and the abstention was the Deputy of St John.
Very well. The next amendment, and indeed the final amendment listed in the order paper, is Amendment 12, lodged by Senator Mezek. Can I ask the Greffier to read the amendment?
Page 2, new paragraph L, after paragraph K, insert a new paragraph L. L, to agree that the upper earnings limit as defined within the Social Security Jersey Law 1974 should be removed, abolishing the upper earnings limit cap on Social Security contributions and on long-term care contributions, increasing the estimated closing balance of the relevant funds by £7 million and £8.5 million respectively, and redesignate the existing paragraph L as paragraph M.
Senator.
Thank you, sir. And of course, we're saving the best till last. And this will be one which will provide the government a completely different opportunity to oppose this as they have previous ones. Where previous ones have been opposed, it's because they apparently cost too much. Where this one it's opposed, it's because it raises too much needed funding. And if members are feeling any sense of deja vu now, it is of course because we have been here before on the towards the end of the day, on a fourth day of a sitting, debating the social security cap and the long-term care tax cap. And there is a very simple reason why this keeps getting brought up again and again. And it is for the very simple reason that the cap on social security contributions and the long-term care tax is unfair. It's morally unjustifiable and it's financially imprudent. And those facts remain the facts every time the Assembly votes to maintain this tax privilege for the highest earners in Jersey. And it will remain that fact until this Assembly one day scraps these caps and moves to a fairer and more equitable system. And I hope that on this occasion, it will be today that we finally decide to end this inequity in our tax system. So the definition of a regressive tax is one where the tax rate reduces as the taxable base increases. The reason that's called regressive, which is a word we would associate with negative connotations, is because that is a bad way of raising revenue to spend on public services, because it means those who are least able to afford it pay proportionately the most, and those who are most able to afford it pay proportionately the least. And it means that the burden lies on the shoulders of people who actually we would like to be spending their money in the local economy, supporting their families, coping with the cost of living. And instead, through our social security and long-term care tax systems, we give a tax break, a tax privilege to the people who least need it and who would least be affected if a change were implemented. And so I'm going to issue this challenge in my opening speech on this to members of the government who will oppose this, and so in particular to the Treasury Minister, who I expect will respond to this. And so since other members have started referring to the Alliance Party before Reform Jersey has in this debate, I would issue a challenge, and this is, this can be not an exercise of point scoring if they choose to rise to this challenge, but purely in the interests of democratic transparency, I would ask them to put up a spokesperson to give their response to this particular challenge. And the challenge that I'm issuing to the Treasury Minister and potentially the Alliance Party, if they have a spokesperson who wishes to speak on this, is I would like them to explain why they believe it is tenable to support tax privileges for the rich, and to explain why. And it may well be the case that they have good reasons. It may well be the case that they have a persuasive argument to make, to say to the ordinary working people of Jersey, here is why we think you should proportionately pay more tax here, and why those people who earn unimaginable amounts of money, far greater than you will hope to, no matter how hard you work in the jobs that you're doing, many of those being vital jobs in our public services, be those teachers or even some doctors probably, and nurses and frontline workers, and those in the private sector who do such valuable jobs for our society as well, why they should be expected to pay a greater percentage of their income in this tax, and why those at the top of society who least need that privilege get that privilege anyway. I would like to hear a moral defence of that from the government and from the Alliance Party. But I can say on behalf of my party that we don't consider there is a moral defence of that. We think it is unfair and inequitable to tax people regressively like this. And that is why we stand for changing that to make the system fairer. And we do so not just on the point of principle, that it's right and fair to tax people progressively, or in this case, not even progressively, but proportionately, but it's the financially responsible thing to do, because we have public services that need to be funded, and they need to be funded to protect the quality of life of people in Jersey, but they also need to be invested in because of the challenges that we know we're facing in the future, not least of all, of course, the ageing population, where as time goes on, our working age to non-working age ratio in our society is going to change, and that will put pressures on our public finances, and it will put pressures on our public services. And we have several choices for how we respond to that. We can respond in the way that successive governments have done over the last 10 years, which is with a Ponzi scheme of a population policy, one which, even with the publication of P117, we have no indication of that changing anytime soon, and no ability to effect a change to that if it's what we want to do, because there is apparently not enough data to work out that a Ponzi scheme is a Ponzi scheme. An alternative is that we actually say to the population, actually, tough luck, we will just cut public services. And that was the tactic that was taken by the 2010 coalition government in the UK and copied by governments here. That has been demonstrated even amongst conservative circles in the UK now as having been a failure. It was a failure there, and it has been a failure in Jersey too. Or the third option is that you seek to raise revenue from your population to fund those services. And there have been some interesting indications that we've had from some members of the government, and there's been some interesting headlines in the media about getting this government plan over the line, or previous propositions in the last few months in this assembly, but with a warning that tax rises may be coming in the future. And you've always got to be concerned when in the future actually means in the next electoral term, rather than in the rest of this electoral term, where those who make those decisions can be held to account for those decisions at the ballot box, but instead in the next electoral term, which presents candidates an opportunity to try to get through that election campaign, dodging this subject as much as possible, or giving assurances on their positions on tax, which later turn out to be completely false. Who here remembers, of course, the "I will not raise GST" remarks by a previous Treasury Minister? And so I think that actually the public deserves some honesty on this. If revenue needs to be raised, let's be frank about that discussion and talk about how we would like that to be done and who we think should be affected by that. We know that there is currently a complete lack of clarity on the long-term funding of our health system. And we are anticipating at some point in the future, being given a clearer indication of what the future for that may be. And we are, of course, anticipating that that will involve, in some shape or form, more funding for healthcare, without any idea as to how that will be raised, how that will be ring-fenced, or what budgets will be changed, or which funds may be abolished or replaced, or what have you. And we know that there was a previous attempt by a previous government to try to raise that revenue by raising essentially the basic rate of income tax by 1%, but not calling it a raise in income tax, actually establishing it as an entirely new tax with all the new bureaucracy and calculation systems that go with it, but also with a cap put in place to prevent those above the upper earnings limits from paying their fair share into it. And so with this amendment, as with previous amendments that have been brought on this, we say enough. Let's actually be honest about the fact that we will need more revenue into our social security system to be able to fund some of those things that we know that we need to fund, whether that's to protect people's quality of life through the benefit system, or whether it's through providing extra funding for our health service offering for GP fees or anything like that. And this provides a way of generating revenue to contribute to that openly and transparently and fairly, without asking those people in Jersey who are struggling to make ends meet, who are suffering from the housing crisis, who are suffering from the effects of COVID, and to rather than say to them, or to avoid having that mature and open conversation with them about how we'll fund our public services, we'll say, at least from the outset, that there should be a contribution made by those who are most capable of making that contribution and who are most able to see their contribution rise without really experiencing negative side effects from that. And that, at least at the start, is some way of addressing this fairly. And that's why we propose scrapping the upper earnings caps for social security and for long-term care. And with long-term care, let's just explore this briefly. The long-term care tax rate was increased at the start of this government, this electoral term, and the upper earnings cap was actually increased. In fact, it was increased quite substantially, up to £250,000. There were options available to us at that time. Originally, it was proposed that the long-term care tax rate would be doubled, but thanks to a scrutiny amendment, that was actually held back and reduced. There was a suggestion behind the scenes that actually the cap wouldn't be raised to £250,000, but in fact would be raised to £500,000, showing that it is something that we can consider doing. It isn't sacrosanct. It is something that can be changed or amended. And the basic rate was increased a bit. The cap was increased a bit, but that basic rate was not increased by the level that the government had initially sought, which means that round two, the next stage of increasing that rate, will be closer on the horizon than it would have otherwise been. Whereas if you choose now to lift that upper earnings cap, you push that back even further and you get to protect people's quality of life through that tax earlier. The government has published comments opposing this, which I think rely on the same old tired arguments. And the one that I find particularly offensive in it is this argument about international competitiveness. That actually we have to offer tax privileges for the super wealthy in Jersey, because if we treated them the same way we treat our local population, they'd be so disgusted they'd get up and leave. And I find that an offensive argument to make, to say that one rule should apply to the vast majority of us, and a different rule which offers exclusive privileges should apply to another section of our population. It's an offensive argument to make, but it also, in my view, totally fails to take into account that competitiveness does not just matter for those at the top of our society, but as has been shown very much in the case during the pandemic, that actually competitiveness matters across all levels of our society. Look at our industries which are struggling to recruit people, particularly hospitality, because many of the people working in those industries on the wage levels that have been traditionally set in those industries, they just can't afford to live. Their rent is too high, cost of living is too high, and so they're going, many of these people, to other places because they can have a better quality of life elsewhere. And our industries are suffering, and the quality of life for the rest of us is suffering because our hospitality offering is not as vibrant as we would want it to be because of earlier closing hours or days where some of our favourite venues aren't opening because they can't find the staff to that, something that's particularly sad. And also those people in the middle, the squeezed middle, those teachers and nurses, those incredibly important key worker roles. I'm particularly sad to see the headline in one of the media outlets recently about social workers who were recruited in our recruitment campaign that was launched under my time, which I was very proud of. Many of those people are not working in the service anymore, have gone elsewhere. And one of the reasons they are attributing that to is the cost of living. And it doesn't matter how much money we throw at a recruitment campaign or anything like that, we're simply not going to keep staff if they can't have a decent quality of life when they come here. And again, the rest of us will suffer the consequences from not having talented and aspirational people in those roles, because what Jersey offered them was not as competitive as what another jurisdiction might be able to offer them. So, sir, I think it is insulting to say that the issue of competitiveness only matters when it counts for that tax rate for those on the very highest earners. It does matter to all parts of our society, and we're paying the price from that by not being able to offer people in those roles the quality of life that they need. So, sir, this amendment is proposed both because I think it's morally the right thing to do, to treat people equally and fairly, but also financially because it offers our public finances the revenue that in years to come will be desperately needed to provide the services that are paid out, not just from social security, but at some point in the future, long-term care as well, meaning that we don't have to put that burden even harder onto the shoulders of people who are already struggling. And it offers a reprieve, at least, whilst that further work goes on developing a population policy that is worthy of the title, for instance. And on those bases, sir, I would ask members, though this hasn't been the first time that they've been asked to consider it, I would ask them to consider making it the last time they're asked to do this so that we can have a fairer tax system and that we can provide that revenue for our public services. And before I sit down, sir, I wish to reiterate the challenge that I made to a representative from the government, who I presume will be the Treasury Minister, and a representative from the other parties as well, so they have the opportunity to be transparent about their positions that the electorate can expect them to hold, to explain, if they are against this amendment, why it is that they will support tax privileges for the super rich. Thank you, sir. I make the amendment.
Thank you very much. Is the amendment seconded? Deputy Masson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. And we are having this debate yet again. So I'd like to ask members not to support this amendment for three particular reasons, which I'll go into. The first one being our economy. and considering the FPP panel's advice. So this is not the right time to consider increasing contributions. Jersey's economy is recovering, but is still weak. We do not know what is in store for us next year. The outlook is very uncertain. This proposal goes against the Fiscal Policy Panel's advice. The FPP are internationally recognised expert economists and have taken into account how our economy is doing and what we are proposing in the government plan over the next few years. Their very first recommendation is revenue raising steps, including higher taxes, impose a burden that would not be appropriate at present. And I just want that to sink into members. They say would not be appropriate at present. And this is what this proposal would do and could damage part of Jersey's economy. Senator Mezek, as he touched on it, there is an argument that it could affect the international competitiveness of certain sectors within Jersey, particularly those of the financial and legal sector, as it will require employees with incomes above $250,000 to pay significantly more social security contributions than they already pay. What is also a consequence of this amendment would be that self-employed people would also have to pay an extra 2.5% social security contributions if they're in that income bracket. And what this would do is there would also be an extra 1.5 long-term care contribution, so 4% in total. And so I just want to be clear to members that when you're talking about social security contributions, the way that it's tiered, when we get to this level, what is collected from social security goes into different pots. And this element of the social security system, when we're talking about this bracket, doesn't collect anything from the HIF, the health insurance fund. So if members are concerned that not enough money is going into the health insurance fund, what is being proposed here will not add an extra penny to the health insurance fund. So I just want to say that now and take that off the table so members are clear on that. So what does this do? This then takes money which then goes into the pension pot or the long-term care pot. And finally, sir, what we also need to remember is that Social Security is at its heart a social insurance scheme. It's not a tax. Now, you might think Social Security contributions are just another tax, and that's true, that we're all expected to make a contribution to the Social Security Fund until we reach pension age, and that this universality and solidarity is a strength of the Social Security system. But that's where similarly, the similarity with general taxation ends. And I think this is very important because Senator Mezek, when he spoke, kept using the word tax and is treating Social Security contributions as a tax, and they're not the same thing. And that's important to make that distinction. Contributions bring a right of protection and a promise of benefits in return during one's lifetime if they are needed. This insurance principle is an important foundation of the social security system and its fairness. There needs to be a fair relationship between the contributions that anyone is expected to pay, regardless of how high their income is, and the protection they get from the social security scheme. This proposal would break that relationship for those with the highest income in Jersey. And as we've heard, Senator Mezek would argue that this is about fairness, and there might be, and that might be true for general taxation. But for Social Security, it's not how. Sorry, so I'm just getting a bit of feedback there. I'll carry on. Fairness for Social Security. However, sir, the fairness in Social Security comes from the overall package of what an individual gets for their contribution. A person with low income or earnings. A person with low income or earnings gets the same value of benefit as a person with much higher income, and that's where the fairness of the system comes out. Contributions of lower earners are supplemented by the contributions of higher earners. And more recently, there has been the parental benefit, which is funded by employers giving an extra 0.5 contribution on higher earnings. And we did that during this term. So therefore, so those are the impacts that this proposal would have at this time. The FPP are telling us not to do it. We know it will have effects on other sections of the job market, and fundamentally, it's important for members to remember that the social security insurance system is a contributory system. It is not a tax. I know that's not comfort anyone who looks at their pay slip and sees money going out, because it feels like a tax, but it isn't, and that needs to be remembered. The money that is raised for social security contributions doesn't get treated as general taxation revenue and then can be spent in other areas. That's not how the system works. It is almost like a hypothecated in how it works, and that there are ring-fenced areas about how the money is spent once it's collected. And this is why at the moment, this amendment should not be supported. Thank you, sir.
Much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, Deputy Ward.
Thanks, sir. I know I've had a lot of me today, but I thought I'd get her out of the way early. It's very interesting, this debate, because we've had so many debates in the last couple of days where the argument has been, but we're not raising any revenue to do this. Where's the money coming from? And the first time there is a proposition or an amendment, sir, that says this is revenue raising, what happens? The people rally round to protect the wealthiest as quickly as they can. And sir, that is the issue we have here. Perhaps, sir, I'll say to the last speaker, if those who are earning over 250,000 or even more, the richest in our society, are struggling to pay this extra social security, they need to organise their finances better. And that's the issue that we've got here. Sir, the reality of this is, if you earn above, actually the figure is more like 2,600 and something with other allowances, then you pay absolutely no more social security. It stops. And you could earn infinite amounts above that. It's this never ending amount. The sort of argument that is used just now regards school headroom funding, but it's an infinite amount. Well, that's okay if you're the wealthiest in our society. And it is clear which side the government stands on. It's not the people of Jersey, the average person working all the hours under the sun, struggling to get by, struggling to pay their rent, or just hoping to have something better than just making ends meet. Oh no, it's those who are the very wealthiest who will be protected. And so when we talk about fairness, fairness is for everybody to contribute what they can. And I believe that many who earn lots and lots, particularly after COVID, recognise how important it is in society that they make their contribution. And this notion that low earners are supplemented by higher earners, what a bizarre notion, sir. This is about what you are able to pay. So if I was earning millions of pounds, I'd expect to pay more. I pay more than somebody earning half what I earn. I expect that. That's the way it works. That's our deal with our society if we're going to have a social security system that works. So, sir, I find yet again contradictions in approaches here that astound me. We are so close to making huge steps, but no, the arguments are the money's not there. What are we going to do about the money? And then as soon as, sir, there is a way to raise money, it is refused because it is targeting or bringing into the fold people that those in government and their hangers-on want to protect above anyone else. And so that is seen by our society now. That is seen by people, particularly as we come out of COVID and people have struggled. And so it's about time that this assembly made this step. So we need to remove the social security cap to make it equitable for everybody so that we contribute what we can. It will raise funds. It means it can be spent on something to improve our society. So I urge people to support this and say to people that if you are not going to support revenue raising, don't vote against things that need money because you're missing an opportunity, sir. So please, let's give this a go. Let's finish the day well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Valois.
Yes, thank you, sir. So when I stood at the last elections, I made it quite clear in my manifesto about earnings limits. I gave some compromises about what I thought may be the case. But I actually think that this is something that I should support. And sir, the arguments around using FPP as the staple hold to argue against this shows why some of the arguments are inconsistent. FPP also made a recommendation about not creating more funds, but yet the government argued like there was no tomorrow about why we needed a technology fund. So I'm sorry. I just wanted to make those points because I just find it astonishing sometimes when I'm hearing some of the arguments that are coming out. It's okay for one and not for the other. Basically, this is about priorities. Basically, this is about position on policy that the government have and some assembly members might see completely different, and that's absolutely fine. But I believe, from my point of view, I had it in my manifesto. I don't accept the FPP argument because it wasn't accepted by government for technology fund. So I'll be supporting Senator Mezek in his amendment. And maybe that revenue could help with the further funding for the funding formula in the inclusion review next year, when the Children and Education Minister identifies exactly what it is he needs in order to pay for it. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Senator Deputy of Grooville.
Thank you, sir. I must confess, I had, listening to Deputy Ward, I had a lot of sympathy with what he was saying, and it is an easy one, I think, to look at the higher earnings and think, well, yes, of course, they should be paying more in tax. They should be paying the same rate as everybody else. That is surely right. But this is the Social Security Fund, and to put a cap on, to remove the cap means that anything over and above that is actually tax. So we are actually taxing them more, and that might appeal, and which is why I've just said I have a lot of sympathy with where indeed the proposer and Deputy Ward was coming from. But this is not the right fund to be doing it through, because any monies, any extra monies raised in this fund will be ring-fenced and have to remain with Social Security and the Long-Term Care Fund. They cannot then be used for other things like education and whatever we choose to use them on. They have to stay within that fund. So it would mean it's very restrictive. And also, well, I'm afraid FPP are advising not to raise new taxes now. And this is exactly what this would be. It would be a new tax. And, you know, future employers or employers now, when they've got choices to come here or go to Guernsey or elsewhere, they might very well do that. And it wouldn't only be the rich that are losing out and having to move, but there would be a loss of jobs. And so I think we're in a very delicate economic position right now. The cap was raised quite considerably in 2020, and I think we've got to give it some time to bed in and see what results from that, and see the results post-pandemic, post-Brexit of where we are before we start raising taxes. But this is not the right fund to be raising taxes in. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. Earlier in this week, we had a debate about cost of our health service and how we fund this. And I think all of us will have known, although that vote didn't go through, all of us know that we're facing huge increase costs of the aging society, demands of healthcare, that we have to find ways of paying for. And I certainly made the point, I think others kind of went along with the principle that we do need to look ways of funding our healthcare costs. And of course, although what we got here is a proposal that is not a health fund, but an element of the social security contributions does go into the health fund. And of the various parts of the proposal here, as Deputy Lavie of Grouville, or Deputy of Grouville has reminded us, there are two parts to this. One is that those real high super earners that are either in employment or self-employment that pay social security contributions, and of course they'd have to be below pensionable age. Those people will pay the 2.5% on their surplus income. And when I saw the comments paper, I had no idea that people on this earning in the island are earning in excess of £21,000 a month for employment, because that's what the comments say. Unless I've misread this, I think people are puzzled, but I was puzzled, I can tell you. Page 2 of the contributions, it says 350 people earn in excess of that and would pay 2.5%, or the employers would pay for them. And equally, self-employed people would pay similarly for people who having, obviously, I suppose, from their trading activities. And then if there are taxpayers, which are the super rich that which are below pension age, they would also pay the social security contributions, because those are the rules for all of us, that while we're below pension age, we have to pay contributions. And not only there's a big chunk of that money going to pay for our health fund, which of course is, where we're going on that at the moment. We've been ripping the money out of that fund for a long time. So as if where's the magic money tree coming to replace that, which was the essence of that debate. But most important for me, pensions. That's where the rest of the money goes. We know that we've got a lot of pensioners in this island living in, frankly, unsatisfactory, below the line, below the poverty line, I believe. Not acceptable. The high, pensioners suffer when you have the kind of inflation and high costs that we're facing. And so it's absolutely right that we have a really, really healthy pension fund. And I would hope that in the future, that whoever is the Social Security meeting after the elections, I won't be there, puts priority for pensions. Priority for pensions so that we can upgrade the amounts being paid, have pension flexibility, that there are lots of ways that people could buy extra years and have some options in there where they don't have now, and have the opportunity to have that put right. So that now we need a healthy fund. We were told it was £2 billion. Well, okay, so what this movement here, according to the figures, would put an extra £7 million into that pot, and there will be a proportion of it goes into the HIFT, and how much that would be. Let's say it's a couple of million. That's still £5 more million going into the pension fund. I think that's really into the states, but not the state's employees one, but the public pension scheme, the state pension scheme for everybody. And then there's the other bit of this, which I think is rather different issues, which is the long-term care fund ceiling, which is where all of us taxpayers, we're all taxpayers, we have to pay 1.5% at the moment, whether we're of pensionable age or not. We pay that for our whole life. And it's absolutely right that fund is really built up and as strong as it can be. Because look, what we've seen about the aging population numbers, and we even heard this week from our Social Security Minister, that our Security Minister was intended, or in fact, the actuarial report recommended that goes up to 2%. But it's not done. So that indicates to me that fund is in need of the extra funding source. So for me, it seems to be an absolute principle Look, in this island, let's take the long-term care fund principle, because that illustrates the principle very clearly. Look, none of us know whether we're going to need to draw upon that fund in later life. If we're lucky, we won't. If we're not lucky, then I'm afraid that fund, and that applies to every one of us, whether you're super rich or whether you're a person in ordinary circumstances. And that's absolutely right, that we all pay an equal share, proportionate on that of that. So raising the ceiling to do that, which would put another £8 million into the long-term care fund, I think is a really good thing to do. Now, I do accept the logic, of course, that I see what we've got is economic arguments, and we're going to frighten off people earning money, high money. I don't think that applies to the long-term care people of retired age, people who have come to this island to settle in retirement. And, you know, I think them paying a full share is equity, as I've said. I can see the issue about employment, in other words, but I do ask, is that really likely? Are people really going to be discouraged at this very, very super earnings level? Because that's what it is. It's not just high earners, it's super earnings level. Is it going to really discourage them? And of course, fiscal policy panel. I personally, look, I'm sure all these people are the best economic experts you can get. They say, oh, we can't have extra taxation. But for me, all of the future indicates that we need to have more, a broader tax base in Jersey for the future. If we don't now, we will do in the future. So we should not close our minds to that. And for the fiscal policy panel, say no new taxes. I've heard that argument so many times. Now, I'm not criticising them, but I am reminded that when that same panel, I think it was, gave us advice about what the economic effect was COVID would be, they told us that property values would collapse and property values would decline and house prices would be low. What happened? Absolutely the reverse. Has that been explained? No. So I think as politicians, I think we set the goals, we set the targets, and I think our experts advise us and support us. But in the end, politicians decide. And so for me, sir, I think this is the time now to put our marker down, yes, and vote this and support it, sir. So I'm strongly behind this.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. What gets me in this assembly is that despite the progress I've seen made in the last 13 years or so, when things like a discrimination law didn't exist, and we had to battle arguments saying we don't need a discrimination law, people should just be nice to each other. And we've got to a point now where it's just axiomatically accepted that that kind of thing is the right thing to do and that we should have these kind of laws. That we constantly have to have similar debates about something else which should be accepted as axiomatically true and instinctively something that we should all know in our hearts and our heads is that you shouldn't have a system whereby the poor and the middle earners pay proportionately much more than those who are most able to pay in our society. And you don't need to be a biblical scholar and to know the story of the widow's mite to know that it doesn't make moral or even economic sense to do that. And a challenge has been put out to the Alliance Party, who are in government by and large, as to why they continue to support policy that favours the super rich in our island without being able to even explain that in coherent terms to the people who elect them or to their fellow colleagues in the Assembly. So I repeat Senator Mezek's challenge to the governing Alliance Party to say exactly why it is they think that by favouring the rich, the super rich in such a way that they're doing a benefit to the majority of the island. And remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who earn over £250,000 every year. There are some people who, most people don't even earn that kind of money in a 5-year period. And I've heard an allusion made to self-employed people, but we're talking about self-employed people who earn, it's £260,000 a year. That's the ones we're talking about. Nobody is going to be affected by this proposition under that ceiling, and because we're talking about the upper earnings limit, not the standard earnings limit, and we're not even asking them to pay the full amount of 6.5% like we all do. We're asking them to pay 2.5% more. And I started off by being partly heartened when I heard the Deputy of Groove Hill saying, you know, it sounds like a logical thing to do. Penny's starting to drop, I thought, because of course it's the right thing to do. But then she said, but it would become a tax on the rich over 260,000. And you think, I was thinking to myself, but it can't just become a tax at that point. It surely is a tax already, if you want to call it a tax. And this is, I think, where it gets into the semantics of it. But we've had these arguments before. If you earn an average wage in Jersey, you're paying that 6.5% on all of your wages, and you're paying it before your tax even. So you're taxed on your social security contributions, and you're paying social security on your pre-tax, on your gross income. And this is the issue here. It is a tax for those vast majority of people who live on their wages and who have what I would call modest earnings. And it doesn't suddenly become a tax just because you happen to earn more than £250,000 a year. And remember, if you earn £250,000 a year, it probably only takes you maybe 4 or 5 years to save up enough money to buy your own house in Jersey. Whereas if you earn an average wage, you're probably condemned to not being able to afford one ever and being in perpetual rental, possibly leaving the island. You could be one of those part of the cohort who is making the very tough decision to leave the island, as we've seen in the media and in social media, because our island has become too expensive for our fellow islanders to live. But that's okay, because we continue to make policy for the super rich, and that favours the super rich in our island. So I would ask, and I know that where the Deputy of Groove Hill lives, I've lived there a certain time myself. It's a beautiful part of the island, and it's got some very big houses there. It's got some very nice and well-to-do residents who I'm sure wouldn't necessarily be caught by this system if they're living off other income, which is unearned. But we always get into the argument, and this is one argument, is saying, well, we couldn't do that because it's ring-fenced, and because you can't spend all of this money, the £7.5 and £8 million that this would raise, respectively, a significant amount of money, because you can't spend that on every aspect of public spending that we might want to, it's not worth doing, which is complete nonsense, of course. There's a paucity of argument there, because you can spend it on a big load of things, a lot of projects. You could spend it on doctors, you can spend it on dentists, making those two areas much more affordable. You can spend it on lots of aspects that relate to healthcare and to social care if we wanted to, sir. And of course, the corollary of that should be those people saying, well, because it doesn't make this money available to spend, and because it effectively becomes a tax, well, then we should just raise the income tax rate. But of course, they won't do that either, because these people who defend the tax breaks for the super rich in Jersey are also the ones who say of 20% is sacrosanct. Even though we don't have a tax rate of 20% now, we've got a tax rate of above 21%, and we have a tax rate for most people on their disposable income of 26%. So most people in the islands pay 26% of income tax on their disposable income, whereas the super rich pay only 20% on their disposable income. So that's the kind of context we have here. And the issue we've got, and I'm sorry if some members think I'm going on, but it is really important, because this is about the type of island that we have going forward, and it should be set on values, and it should be set on vision. And the Council of Ministers and other parties will be going to the electorate and they will be saying, we want you to vote for us in the future, and this is our plan for what we're going to do. And I think the politicians who are honest will say, by the way, taxes are going to have to go up to pay for certain things, but they won't be telling you necessarily who they are going to tax. But we know there's a pretty good track record from the governing party that they won't tax those who can afford it. So that means you're going to see more indirect taxation, things like duty, things like petrol prices going up, things like GST, possibly other indirect contributions for average people in Jersey, just so that they can protect their rich mates. And that's not something that you will see from a Reform Jersey-led government. You will see what we've been doing up until now already. You'll be seeing, we'll be saying to the electorate, if we do need to put taxes up, and there's a chance that taxes may need to go up, we will make sure that they fall first and foremost on those who are able to pay. And this argument that if somebody is needed in the island to be employed for a wage of above £260,000 a year, that they're somehow not going to come to the island because that employer isn't going to be able to afford an extra 2.5% is complete nonsense. I mean, these are the employers who can most afford to pay. And just think about how inequitable that is, that actually if you're an employer who tends to need to employ more employees but at a lower wage, if you take on 2 people at, or let's say you take on 5 people at 40 grand or 60 grand a year, if you excuse the vernacular, sir, £60,000 a year, you're going to be paying the full 6.5% contribution on that. But if you just take one person on or another person on over £260,000, you're not paying anything extra on that at the moment. So if you multiply that through industries that have to employ people at what we call average or, you know, reasonably modest wages, they're paying the full 6.5%. So an employer who's got 100 employees at the £50,000 mark will be paying the full social security contributions, where if you can afford to employ 2 or 3 people at £1 million a year, the social security fund is effectively losing out, even though the same amount of wages might be paid. I hope members follow what I'm getting at. So there isn't a fairness there either. And lastly, let's deal with the Fiscal Policy Panel's comments. I think Senator Valois made a good job about the selective nature of which the government chooses whether or not to apply the comments of the Fiscal Policy Panel. But the way I read it is that this isn't a new tax anyway. It's a tax that already exists. Social security contributions exist already. The cap has been moved, and a new level of contributions, which is much lower, has already been recognised that it can be charged where it wasn't charged before. And what Senator Mezek is simply saying here is extend that, to take the cap off completely, allow the richest earners in our island, the highest paid workers in our island, to be able to pay a little bit more than they are already. And I don't like the idea that we presume that the highest earners in Jersey wouldn't be prepared to pay this amount. I mean, at least they get a choice, it seems. When we impose taxes and charges on other individuals, we don't say, well, what if they don't like it? But with this group, there's a presumption from some quarters in the Assembly that they simply won't like it and they won't tolerate it, whereas the reality is that they will be the best place to be able to afford it, because they probably have much more disposable income than other average workers and other average islanders, sir. At some point, we have to realise that this is the right thing to do and that it will be done. And if it won't be done by this government, sir, then it will be done by a future government. But luckily, the government in this Assembly are in the minority, and it's not up to them. It's up to all of us as individually elected members to decide what's right to do and to vote with our hearts and heads on this, because they should be united in realising that this is both the morally right thing to do and the economically right thing to do so.
Thank you very much, Deputy Conetaba St John.
Thank you, sir. My last speech, I spoke about mindset and culture. Well, what culture do we want here? What is our mindset? We're talking about people who will be earning £1,000 a day, every day. So when I was earning £1,000 a day, so I was only working 2 days a week. But these people will work 5 days a week and will have to earn more than £1,000 a day. Senator Volbar spoke about priorities. I'm intended to agree with my other parishioner, Deputy Tadier, that the amendment for me is about values. It's about values, sir. So I've enjoyed life on both sides of the fence, leaving school at 14 and earning 50 pence an hour in my first job, moving on before my retirement as a senior executive, where I was happier, I would say, to pay my social security then, because I didn't really notice it compared to when I was a young man starting out in life. Money in the long-term care fund would reduce the need potentially to increase contributions in the future, or could be put towards our aging population. I'm pleased to say that I've got more confidence in what Jersey has to offer than our International Development Minister. If people choose to come here due to our fair social, if people choose not to come here due to our fair social security contributions, do we really want them? I'd be very surprised if that would even feature in their decision making. Just think what they'll be paying currently if they were based in the United Kingdom in their tax and social security. I agree with Deputy Young's view. Sir, it's about values, it's about equality. Earlier this week, there was some criticism on social media of our newest St John residents. Well, sir, I welcome them, just as I welcome all new residents to St John with open arms, and I hope they settle into the new home and environment. In my experience, sir, people in this bracket value their life here and would see the reason behind this change. People earning the amounts that we're talking about, sir, employ accountants so that they can be tax efficient. Sir, we're going to hear in the next 6 months about people who are fiscally responsible with a social conscience. Sir, I put myself firmly in that bracket and I will be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And I just want to briefly just get things absolutely crystal clear. There's been much talk about our social security contributions. Are they a tax? Are they insurance? What are they? And they're a fair hybrid, I think. They're not quite insurance. They were sold as insurance way back when some far-sighted people had the sense to say we need some kind of welfare system, pension system into our old age. And so they are paid at a certain rate with a third paid by the employee, a third of the contributions paid by the employer, and the third contributed to from general taxation. And that's where, if you like, the problems occur. Because, for example, in the last year, we put something like £65 million as our third from states taxation into the fund. This is due to rise to 70 million and then to 80 million because pensioners are increasing. Pensions are increasing all the way. So we're looking at a contribution from tax or general taxation, which can't be spent, which or contributing to the pension fund, the Social Security pension fund. And that's seen as sacrosanct. What it does mean, if you raise more contributions, and the suggestion is here, Social Security, this measure alone will raise something like £7 million. That £7 million can go to the supplementation, the direct grant, into the fund, thus raising the fund, but can also be spent as general taxation. You saved it from your fund. So it can be spent as general taxation. And that's where we're talking today about measures to increase by £10 million the money going into education. And that could be part of the system. But that one third, it's important. And it's important because what happens is that some low earners don't meet the standard earnings limit, and therefore they have to have their contribution topped up to make sure that pensions are fair and are paid equally to everyone. And that's actually what happens. And we've heard this afternoon that supplementation, the way that works, but that what we are aiming at doing is making sure that we in our old age, and it is we, can live well, even though we no longer work. And what we've got, and I think it was some contributor previously talked about, and we need to look after our pensioners. What we've got is significant numbers, around about 1/3 of pensioners who are in relatively low income. And bear in mind, again, I'll remind people, we have abandoned the income distribution survey that was due to take place, what we've left with in last year, due to take place last year, and what we have are figures dating from 2014 and 15. So there's a big piece of work coming down the line. It's going to talk to us about our income distribution, what's happened to the rich and the poor over the last 6 years. How has the gap grown or narrowed? We suspect that because of Oxera and a general depression of wages, that the income gap will be increasingly large. It was high enough last time we did it in 2014. It certainly, I suspect, will be much bigger nowadays. So bear in mind that whatever we're doing here, and we are raising extra money through these charges, this taxation, is to protect our low earners and our pensioners in the future. Thank you.
Right, Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. It's always a very interesting debate, this one, and it was only 2 years ago that I did raise the cap by 100,000. I spent a lot of time listening to tax policy advisors. What did I want the money for? Why, this, that and the other. I literally said, well, I know there's going to be a need to extend parental benefits, and this is what I need to raise. How far can we push it? And they said it came back at 250,000, and we pushed it, and we got to 250,000, and I then extended the parental benefits, and they're now being paid out, sir. But as I say, this isn't just on a whim. There's some very misconceptions going around. I don't know if Senator Messick meant this when he crafted the amendment. It doesn't touch the employee. It's the employer. Just employers of people who earn 250,000. Now, you might not think that makes a difference, but it does, because I'm realistic, sir. If you think I could just grab some money off of higher earners, I wouldn't do it. Senator Messick, and all the speakers so far in favour, think you can just hit a higher employers, and they're just going to take it. Everything's going to stay the same. When you've got a sister island over there, who then will be a much better place to employ people from. Not here, there. we could lose a lot more of this money than we think we can get. We can't put it in the HIF. It's not anything over this amount from the employer does not go into the HIF. It's quite clear. We can't spend it on education. This is a social security fund. It is for pensions, absolutely. Absolutely. We really need to be careful when we can suddenly say, we'll listen to expert advice here, we're paying for the FPP for the advice, but today, no, we don't want to hear it. Don't put any more taxes up till 2024. When you start touching higher employers, the Constable of St John said, well, if they don't like it, they can go somewhere else. Well, they might well do that, but that's a lot of money we will lose. That does actually, in the circle, already help the lower earning worker to pay their pension, absolutely to pay their pension. It's one of those, there's not that many people, and they do bring in a lot of money. And if you start moving things about very suddenly without knowing the consequences, you could really be a lot worse off. Now, I can't say it enough. I've said it to my scrutiny panel. I've said it to the Assembly. Council have said it. Every fund is having an actuarial review this end of this year, early next year. So it'll give the new council of ministers the real up-to-date figures to find out what's in the funds. At the moment, I don't have a problem with the Social Security Fund. It's got monies in it to 2070. I probably won't be here then, sir, but I'm going to have a good try. And we're still collecting it. But I think the Deputy Gruville spoke so much sense. She's worked in finance. She understands finance. You, at your peril, you start moving this on a whim and say, oh, well, of course, it's my principles that everything should be fair. But it doesn't work like that. The world doesn't work like that. And if the senator had wanted to spend this money on other things, or even directed it to what he wanted it spent on, he may have had a better case. I mean, I wouldn't know when one constable in this assembly, sir, would go to their rates assembly and say, we're putting your rate up a penny this year. We don't know yet what we want to spend it on, but we think it's fair. It hasn't gone up for 2 or 3 years, but we think it's fair. No, you can't. You cannot take a rate, as far as from memory. You can't ask more than your expenditure. But we need to know what this money, and it is sort of, you know, it's money that could be there. People, how many employers, as I say, it's not the employee. The the Constable of St John said the man earning £1,000 a day, about £1,000 a day. It's his employer, and he can probably, you know, do the employing from anywhere in the world, and he may well just do that. Why wouldn't he? These are very successful people. They make this money because they're very successful people. They don't think, oh, no, this is going to cost me X, Y. But if I just move a few miles across the water or even somewhere else, not the UK, I'm not comparing it to the UK because, you know, we're not in competition with the UK. Why wouldn't they? So as I say, Senator Mesick is going to sum up. That's fine. He may want to explain why he's put it on the employer and self-employed. Self-employed people. Somebody said, you know, it's still a lot of money, but I can't work it out. And as I say, you're talking a few people in the scheme of things that are the most people, the employers, it's not employees, the employers who can move at a drop of a hat, sir. So just be very careful. You think you might raise some money, it might look fairer, and suddenly you're sitting there and going, oh, my funds are going down. And then what do we do? Do we then actually have to raise the other end on the lower earner? as I say, be very, very careful. People took the 100,000, obviously didn't like it. That was on the employer as well, wasn't on the employee. So you're hitting the same people again. They took that after me researching it for a good year. So I've just, please, do not support this with just this, as I say, not really. This is what it will raise if it stays the same. I don't think it will stay the same, sir. As I say, you're hitting the same people I hit 2 years ago with my social conscience, so I could pay parental benefits that I extended to 32 weeks, all with the support of the Assembly and I think Reform Party as well. Everything I did on parental leave and parental benefits, they supported me 100%. But I can't support them on this because they really don't know, have no idea if it will raise money or it could lose a lot of employers on the very top end. And why wouldn't they leave, sir? Thank you.
Very much, Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I have to say that I've been somewhat disappointed at the tone of the contributions by various members and the introduction of a social division into the equation. When I came to the island some 40 years ago, it was acknowledged that there would be a relatively small number of what were then called wealthy immigrants to the island, who would be obliged to buy properties at the top end of the market, not affecting the local market, and who will be committing themselves to paying 20% on their earnings. And it was generally agreed, I think by all sectors of society, that that was a good thing. Their contributions kept taxes down for the rest of us. 40 years on, the position may not be quite the same, and I do accept that we need to keep an eye on the number of people who come to the island and the level of tax they pay, but to a certain extent the same principle applies. These people who do come to the island, yes, they can perhaps well afford to pay greater social security contributions, but if they know they don't need to pay them elsewhere, then that's where they will go. I think anyone speaking on behalf of Locate Jersey will say that when potential candidates come to the island, Jersey isn't a beauty parade. They can go not just to a sister island, but further on the continent, and certain EU nations have made a pitch for such persons, and they will be better off financially there. But we rely on them wanting in many cases, the British way of life. So all I'm saying, sir, is that we certainly need to keep an eye on the number of people we seek to attract to the island, but those we do attract, we need to make sure that they pay the optimum benefit. My concern, sir, is that if we do introduce this extra contribution as per the proposition now before us, that will actually cause some to halt or look elsewhere. If we are seeking to attract people, we need to attract those who are going to produce, amongst other things, of course, the highest monetary benefit to the island, as well as making other contributions. And I do emphasise that monetary contributions aren't the one thing. And I do, as per the last speaker, sir, I do have concerns that if this proposition were to go through, it would be against our own interests, in the sense that we might find ourselves putting off potential applicants, maybe forcing others to leave. And again, sir, I go back to my basic point that a certain number of, I might still call them wealthy immigrants, do make a great contribution to the island in more ways than money, and we should be seeking to retain them as best we can and not putting obstacles in their way. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Senator Gorst.
Thank you very much, sir. Unfortunately, my camera's not working again this evening. Sorry about that. So this has been an interesting debate, and I'd like to return to the comments of some of the speakers, and then perhaps to the mover of the proposition. Deputy Southern, one-time Assistant Minister in the Department for Social Security, let's just remind ourselves of that, said that it was the Social Security scheme was a sort of insurance scheme. Of course, he's right. It is a sort of insurance scheme, but it has the attributes of an insurance scheme with a top up from the taxpayer for all of the reasons that we know about and have accepted for many years. Let's be clear, successive social security ministers have managed that scheme. The payments out of it have been uprated appropriately, even to the extent of changing the way that pension payments from the scheme have been uprated, not just via earnings, but also via inflation in certain years. So despite what a number of members have said, it is in effect a scheme into which people pay in based on earnings, based on what a premium type approach should be of a social insurance scheme to get a benefit out at the other end. It is not a taxation. And the same, of course, with the long-term care model. Of course, it uses the mechanisms of the tax system because that was effective and less bureaucratic. But again, it is a scheme that islanders contribute into based on the principles of an insurance approach to be able to support them should they need long-term care, not just when they're older, sir, but during the course of their life. There are two elements to the social security scheme. One is that employees pay, self-employed people pay, but also employers pay. And from an economic perspective, it is a cost of employment to employers. And the reason I raise that, sir, is because most of those arguments in favour of removing this cap altogether have been extolling the benefits of squeezing more money out of employees. Not much has been said about the self-employed, but we must remember that it would affect them as well, and not only employees, but also, of course, 2-1Es. And it seems to me that much of the angst in this debate, if it can be called angst, as the previous speaker, the Deputy of St Mary, indicated, has been pointed to the 2-1E regime. And I would say to those members who don't like that regime, then they should have a conversation with the relevant ministers and seek to engage them to amend that regime. And I know that it is often under review and it is strengthened appropriately to have protections in place. And if they still don't like that, so then they can come back to this assembly and seek to have it changed. That is the right way to deal with any angst felt in that scheme. I personally don't feel angst about that scheme, so I think it has wider benefits than simply the taxation. Yes, it's got to be managed. Yes, we've got to limit the number of individuals that are able to avail the use of that scheme, but I do think it works. And so what we come back to is a proposal to really quite dramatically increase the cost of employment in Jersey. It doesn't compare well with our competitors. we would be out of sync with our competitors. But there's a more fundamental issue here, sir. And the Deputy of St Peter alluded to some of these issues in this debate earlier in the week. What do we need to do in our community to ensure that we are an attractive jurisdiction for high-performing, productive businesses? And I've heard him say, maybe it wasn't in this forum, so that we should be going out and seeking those opportunities. Those opportunities are in the tech and digital sector. The very highest performing tech companies and companies in the digital sector pay incredibly well for the brightest minds. We already struggle, to provide the brightest minds and best educated people through our education system. We've heard some of those debates during the course of this government plan debate. But we do and are able to attract those individuals to our community, and that has very strong knock-on effects for the rest of the community and employment in those companies. Be they private equity companies, be they hedge funds, be they fintech companies, all of those sorts of companies. This proposal, without realising it, I believe, would mean that we were a much less attractive place for those companies. We know, sir, because of, despite what some think about unconstrained immigration, but because of our immigration approach, even now, we know that there is a lot of outsourcing that takes place, and to some extent that outsourcing of jobs which are more administrative in nature is something that I think government rightly supports, because those jobs are going to be taken out of economies across the globe because of digitization and the increase in AI. And so what we should be looking for, sir, is to encourage high value, productive businesses that are employing the brightest and the best from our education system, people from our own community, and also bringing in those from elsewhere and choosing to base their businesses and create employment here. This will do exactly the reverse. If we really are serious about being part of that new economy and attracting those businesses and encouraging local entrepreneurs in this area, then we shouldn't do this. We'd be driving a coach and horses through the insurance-based system anyway. I don't agree with that, certainly not on the spur of an amendment. I accept, sir, it is absolutely the Reform Party's policy. I absolutely accept that, and they are doing nothing other than delivering on their manifesto commitments, and I've got no doubt that they'll go into the next election giving the same commitment to islanders. But for my part, it will make it much more difficult to deliver the transformation that we need right across our island and right across our industries. It would be a short-term potential gain. We can't be sure of what money it would actually raise, because slowly and over time businesses would make decisions based on that greatly increased cost of employment. And let's be clear, that's what businesses, part of the issue that businesses make decisions on. Not individuals, as the Constable of St John said. He's right. They look at lifestyle. They look at the quality of life that they can enjoy here in Jersey. But businesses directly look at the cost of employment. This would greatly increase that cost of employment without any consultation
with a by your leave based on a vote sometime after 5:30 on a Thursday evening, shortly before Christmas. The Social Security Minister, sir, I think has done a very good job in managing the Social Security Fund and the way that she's changed the parameters during the course of her tenure there. And many people will think that it's strange for me to be praising the Social Security Minister, but she has done a very good job. She has squeezed where it's appropriate after the rightful reviews and the rightful consultation. She's right on this, sir. The amendment, I believe, is wrong for all the reasons that I've said, not necessarily the reasons that the proposer is putting forward, but the other unintended consequences that we have not heard very much about. So I really do, sir, as we go into the break for half an hour, I ask members, as they have their cup of tea, as they have their biscuits, to think about the unintended consequences of dramatically increasing the cost of employment in the very sectors where we want to create opportunity, not send that opportunity to our competitors. Thank you, sir. And with that, I call for the brief half-hour adjournment.
Thank you very much, Senator. Well, as indicated, I said that around about this time we would adjourn for 30 minutes approximately. Therefore, I will adjourn until 6:05.
Can I just ask, do we leave this meeting and come back to another one?
Yes, we've been sent another invitation.
If you like.
Okay, thanks.